Every night, without fail, at exactly 3:17 a.m. the sound came. It started as a dull scrape, metal against concrete, followed by a slow, uneven dragging noise that echoed down the quiet suburban street. Anyone awake at that hour would hear it clearly. Most people weren't, but the ones who were never forgot it. The sound came from the house at the end of the block. The gray one with the broken porch light and the tall hedge that hadn't been trimmed in years. That was where Arthur Klein lived. Arthur was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. No one was quite sure. He had lived on that street longer than most of the other residents combined. He never had visitors. Never waved. Never joined neighborhood barbecues or meetings. He worked nights, or at least that's what people assumed, because no one ever saw him leave during the day. But every night at 3:17, Arthur came outside. One of the neighbors, a young woman named Rachel who lived across the street, noticed it first. She suffered from insomnia, the kind that made sleep feel optional rather than necessary. Around her third week living there, she heard the noise and peeked through her bedroom blinds. Arthur was bent over near his driveway, dragging a black trash bin toward the curb. What struck her immediately wasn't the time. It was the effort. The bin moved slowly, inch by inch, as if it weighed far more than ordinary household garbage. Arthur leaned his full body into it, shoes scraping against the pavement. His arms shook as he pulled. Once, he even stopped to catch his breath, hunched over and breathing hard before continuing. When he finally reached the curb, he straightened the bin carefully, adjusted the lid, and stood there for a moment, just staring at it. Then he went back inside. Rachel checked the clock on her phone. 3:17 a.m. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe he worked odd hours. Maybe he took out his trash early. Some people were just strange. But the next night it happened again. And the next. Always 3:17. Never early. Never late. Other neighbors began to notice. A man who walked his dog late at night mentioned it casually. A delivery driver said he'd seen the old guy dragging trash, like it was full of bricks. Someone joked that maybe Arthur was dumping bodies. Everyone laughed. No one believed it. Weeks passed. Trash day came and went, yet Arthur's bin was never collected. Somehow, it always ended up back beside his house by morning. No one ever saw him bring it back. It just reappeared. Rachel started keeping her blinds cracked open at night. She noticed details that unsettled her. Arthur never turned on any outdoor lights. He worked in near darkness, guided only by the faint glow of streetlights. He never looked around, never checked if anyone was watching. His face remained blank, almost tired, like someone performing a chore they hated but couldn't stop doing. One night she saw something else. As Arthur dragged the bin, the lid lifted slightly with each jolt, just enough for Rachel to see something pale inside. She couldn't make out what it was, only that it wasn't black plastic or trash bags. The lid slammed shut again. Rachel didn't sleep after that. She considered calling the police but had nothing concrete. A neighbor taking out trash late at night wasn't a crime. And the idea of accusing a man of something unthinkable based on a glimpse in the dark felt absurd. Then came the night Arthur didn't go back inside. At 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, Rachel heard the familiar scrape and looked out her window. Arthur was already halfway down the driveway dragging the bin. But this time something was different. The bin kept tipping. It rocked violently from side to side as if whatever was inside was uneven or shifting. Arthur struggled more than usual, grunting softly with effort. Halfway to the curb, he lost his grip and the bin fell over with a loud crash. Rachel gasped. Arthur froze. For a long moment he didn't move. He just stood there staring at the fallen bin. Then, slowly, he knelt down and placed his hands on the lid. That's when the screaming started. It came from inside the bin. Muffled. Desperate. Human. Rachel's heart slammed in her chest. She scrambled for her phone, fingers shaking as she dialed 911. While the phone rang, she watched Arthur's reaction. He didn't look surprised. He sighed. With a calmness that made Rachel's stomach turn, Arthur lifted the bin upright again. The screaming grew louder, panicked, pounding from the inside. Arthur pressed the lid down with both hands until the sound dulled to faint, choking sobs. Rachel whispered into the phone, telling the dispatcher everything in rushed fragments. Her neighbor, the bin, the screaming. She begged them to send someone quickly. Arthur dragged the bin the rest of the way to the curb. Then he stood there. He didn't go back inside. He just stared down the street as if waiting. Police arrived within minutes. Lights flashed red and blue against the houses. Officers approached Arthur with weapons drawn, shouting commands. Arthur raised his hands slowly and dropped to his knees. When they opened the trash bin, they found a woman inside. Alive, but barely. She was dehydrated, bruised, and bound with tape and plastic restraints. Her mouth was raw, her voice shredded from screaming. She kept repeating the same words over and over. He said it was trash night. He said it was time. Arthur was arrested on the spot. The investigation that followed horrified the entire neighborhood. Arthur had been abducting people for years, mostly runaways, drifters, and people without close family. He kept them in his basement, sometimes for weeks, sometimes longer. When he decided he was done, he sealed them inside the trash bin. Always at 3:17 a.m. Police believed the time mattered to him. A ritual. A rule he never broke. They found stains in the bin that never came out. They found remnants that confirmed the neighbors' worst jokes had been closer to the truth than anyone wanted to admit. Arthur never explained why. But the most disturbing part came later. When detectives interviewed the woman who survived, they asked why Arthur hadn't killed her yet. She stared at them, confused. He wasn't finished, she said. They asked what she meant. She told them Arthur always waited. He waited until the person inside the bin stopped making noise. That night, she hadn't stopped screaming. Because for the first time in years, Arthur hadn't come back inside. And even now, neighbors swear that on quiet nights, when the street is empty and the hour is late, they still hear something heavy being dragged down the pavement at exactly 3:17 a.m. Even though Arthur Klein's house has been empty ever since. The call came late in the evening. Detective Ramirez's voice was calm, almost clinical, but there was an edge that made Julia's stomach knot. "Ma'am, we need you to come down to the morgue. There's been an incident and we need you to identify the body." At first, Julia thought it might be a mistake. Maybe a distant cousin or someone with a similar name. But as the officer on the line listed her address, her hands started trembling. She didn't know anyone who had been reported missing. Nobody. And yet, there was a body that somehow connected to her. The drive to the city morgue was a blur. The rain had started, slicking the streets and making the night feel heavier. Julia kept replaying the possibilities in her head, trying to rationalize, but every scenario felt worse than the last. When she arrived, the fluorescent lights of the facility made everything feel sterile, almost unreal. Detective Ramirez met her at the door, his expression unreadable. "Please follow me," he said. His words were soft, but they carried a weight that made Julia's heart race. They walked down a long corridor. Every door they passed had small windows showing bodies lying motionless on metal slabs. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something colder, something she couldn't name. And then they stopped. Ramirez opened the last door and gestured inside. The body lay under a white sheet. Julia's breath caught. Ramirez pulled the sheet back. And there it was. Her body. Her clothes. Her shoes. Her scarf from last week's grocery trip. Even the little silver necklace she had worn every day for years. Every detail matched perfectly. But that wasn't possible. She was standing here, alive, staring at it. Her legs threatened to give way, but she forced herself to stay upright. Ramirez cleared his throat. "We found her, or him actually, on the side of the highway. No ID. We assumed it was you because of, well, everything matched." Julia shook her head. I'm here. I'm me." Her voice broke. The words felt hollow, as if they could not reach the impossible truth before her eyes. The detective looked uneasy, glancing at the other officers outside the room. "Ma'am, we didn't check thoroughly. Maybe someone staged it, maybe it's some horrible coincidence. But, we need you to confirm it." Confirmation. That word twisted in her gut like a knife. How do you confirm that someone who looks exactly like you is you? She stepped closer, her mind racing. The body's skin was pale, almost waxen, and the lips had a bluish tint. She reached out a hand, almost instinctively, but stopped herself. Her fingers froze a few inches away. Moved. Just slightly. A twitch of the fingers, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. Julia stumbled backward, bumping into the wall. It moved," she shouted. The room seemed to shrink around her. The lights flickered. Ramirez's face went pale. Then the body's head turned. Slowly. Its eyes opened. And it smiled. A cold, empty smile that was hers, but not hers, was all wrong. Too sharp. Too deliberate. You shouldn't have come, it said. Julia's scream tore through the room, but no one outside could hear it. She spun around and ran, slamming into the hallway, but every door looked the same. Every corridor stretched on forever. And then she realized she wasn't running at all. She was standing still. Somewhere behind her, that laugh echoed again. Oh, hello. Familiar. The officers found the morgue later that night. They found the body. They found the lights flickering. They found a white sheet covering an empty slab. But Julia, she was gone. The only trace left was her scarf lying neatly folded on the counter, and a note scribbled in her handwriting, "Don't look for me. I'm already inside." From that night on, people reported sightings. A woman walking alone in the city at night, wearing Julia's clothes, smiling at strangers with a cold, unnatural calm. And sometimes, when you stand in front of a mirror just before falling asleep, you could swear she's standing there behind you, waiting. It was a quiet Friday evening when everything started to go wrong for the Thompson family. They had hired a new babysitter, a college student named Megan, who was polite, punctual, and had been recommended by a friend. Their son Danny was 7, full of energy and notorious for being a night owl. But Megan seemed confident enough to handle him, and Mrs. Thompson had left detailed instructions for dinner, homework, and bedtime. Mr. Thompson had stayed late at the office that day, and by the time he started driving home, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. The streets were unusually empty, the kind of silence that makes every small sound echo through a car. He was scrolling through a playlist when his phone buzzed. Expecting a routine text from Megan, maybe a small update about Danny, he unlocked it and froze. "He's awake. What do I do?" The message was simple, typed in lowercase, but the panic behind it was unmistakable. He immediately called the number, his fingers trembling slightly on the steering wheel. Megan answered, her voice strained and breathless. "Mr. Thompson, it's Danny. He won't stay in bed. I think someone's here." "Who's there?" he asked, gripping the wheel tighter. "I don't know," she whispered. "I heard someone upstairs. I don't know what to do. He's in the living room now watching me, but I can't." The line went dead. Panic shot through him. He sped home, swerving through the dark streets. He called 911, explaining the situation as calmly as he could, but the operator's words did little to ease the dread in his chest. They assured him that help was on the way, but the nearest unit was at least 10 minutes out. 10 minutes felt like hours as he turned onto his street, every shadow between the trees suddenly threatening. When he pulled up, the front door was slightly ajar. The porch light flickered weakly, casting a thin yellow glow across the steps. He ran inside, shouting Megan's name, his heart hammering against his ribs. The living room was empty, the furniture exactly where it should have been. No sign of Danny. No sign of Megan. Then his phone buzzed again. A new message from Megan's number. "I'm upstairs. He's here. Don't come in." Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he knew he couldn't leave them. Slowly he climbed the stairs, each step creaking under his weight. The hallway was dark, the faint sound of breathing echoing from the end near Danny's room. He stopped outside the door, his hand hovering over the knob. "Danny?" he called softly. No answer. Just that same irregular breathing. Then the phone buzzed once more, sitting in his palm. "He knows you're here. Hide." A cold shiver ran down his spine. He swung the door open. The room was empty, Danny's toys were scattered, but the bed was untouched. Then he noticed something moving in the corner. Shadows coalescing around a figure, crouched low. He blinked and it was gone. A voice whispered from behind him, soft, familiar, but not Megan's. "Daddy?" He spun around. Megan was standing in the doorway, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. "Get out. He's upstairs, and he's not human." Before he could ask what she meant, the room went silent. Then a door slammed somewhere above, hard enough to shake the floor. They froze. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed down the hallway. Then another text buzzed. He held up the phone to see. "You shouldn't have come in." The house groaned as if it were alive. Shadows stretched and twisted along the walls. Something heavy breathed at the top of the stairs. And then Danny's laughter, high-pitched, wrong and hollow, filled the house. Mr. Thompson grabbed Megan's hand and ran, bursting out of the front door. The street was still empty, eerily quiet except for the sound of that laughter trailing after them. The neighbors were asleep, unaware. When the police arrived minutes later, they found the house empty. No sign of Danny or Megan. Just the front door ajar, the toys scattered, and a single phone on the living room floor. It lit up with a final message from Megan's number. "He's here. And now he knows you too." To this day, Mr. Thompson never went back inside. And Danny, he was never found. The street had always been quiet in the way quiet neighborhoods tend to be: polite waves, trimmed hedges, porch lights clicking on at dusk. The kind of place where nothing truly bad was supposed to happen. That's why what happened stood out so sharply. On a Tuesday evening just before sunset, patrol cars rolled slowly down Hawthorne Lane. Not lights flashing. No sirens. Just doors opening, closing, and the low murmur of uniformed voices. Officers went door to door, knocking, speaking briefly, handing out small slips of paper. Everyone noticed. Everyone, except one house. The house belonged to a man named Daniel Mercer. Daniel was 34, lived alone, worked long hours at a logistics warehouse across town. He kept to himself. Not unfriendly, just tired. Most nights he came home after dark, ate something reheated, and fell asleep on the couch with the TV on low. That Tuesday he worked a double shift. When he pulled onto Hawthorne Lane close to 11:30 p.m., something felt off immediately. Porch lights were on up and down the street. Curtains were drawn tight. Cars that were usually parked on the curb were tucked into driveways, like everyone had been told to stay inside. Daniel didn't think much of it at first, until he stepped out of his car and saw the paper taped to his neighbor's front door. He walked closer. It was a bright orange notice, folded in half, with a police department seal stamped on the front. Across the street, the same notice hung on every door. Some taped, some wedged under handles. Every house, except his. Daniel stood there for a long moment, keys still in his hand, staring down the street. He counted doors in both directions. 12 houses. All marked. His door was bare. He crossed the street and knocked on his neighbor Mrs. Calder's door. She was an older woman who always smelled faintly of peppermint and mothballs. Normally she answered within seconds. This time she didn't. Daniel knocked again, louder. A light flicked on inside. He heard movement, then the sound of the deadbolt sliding just an inch. The door cracked open. "Yes?" she asked, voice tight. "Hey, Mrs. Calder. Sorry to bother you so late. I just got home. What's with the police notices?" Her eyes flicked past him toward his house, then back to his face. "You didn't get one?" she asked. "No." Her hand tightened on the door. "They came around 6, she said quietly. "Told us to stay inside tonight. Lock our doors. Not to answer for anyone." "For what?" Daniel asked. Mrs. Calder swallowed. "They didn't say. Just to be careful." She paused, then added, "They asked if I'd seen anything strange lately." Daniel frowned. "Like what?" Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Someone walking the street late. Stopping in front of houses. Just standing there." A chill ran through him. "Did they say why they didn't come to my place?" Daniel asked. Mrs. Calder didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at him with an expression that unsettled him far more than fear. It was pity. "I assumed they talked to you already," she said. Then she closed the door. Daniel stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the locks slide back into place. When he returned to his house, the silence inside felt heavier than usual. He locked the door, double-checked the windows, and tried to laugh it off. Maybe the officers missed his house. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe nothing. He turned on the TV, but every sound outside pulled his attention away. A passing car. A distant dog barking. The creak of the house settling. Around midnight, his phone buzzed. A missed call. A known number. He listened to the voicemail. It was short. Just a man's voice. "Daniel Mercer. If you're hearing this, stay inside. Lock everything. Do not open your door for anyone." The timestamp said the message was left at 6:12 p.m. Daniel felt his stomach drop. There was a knock at the door. Not loud. Not urgent. 3 slow taps. Daniel froze. The knock came again. "Daniel?" A man's voice called softly from the other side. "Police department." Daniel's eyes went to the peephole. He stepped closer, heart pounding. The porch light was off. All he could see was darkness and the vague shape of someone standing just out of range. "I already got the message," Daniel said, forcing his voice steady. "You can leave." There was a pause. Then the voice changed. "Daniel," it said again, perfectly mimicking his own tone. "Open the door." Daniel backed away. The voice sighed. "You weren't supposed to be home tonight," it said, no longer pretending. "That's why they didn't warn you." Something scraped softly against the door. Fingernails. Or something like them. "They told everyone else," the voice continued, calm and patient. "Told them to stay inside. Told them not to look. Not to interfere." Daniel's legs felt weak. "Why?" he whispered. "Because you're the last one on this street who lives alone," the voice said. "No witnesses. No one to miss you right away." The handle rattled once. Art. Daniel ran to the back of the house, grabbed his phone and locked himself in the bathroom. He dialed 911 with shaking hands. The operator answered immediately. Before Daniel could speak, she said, "Sir, are you inside your home right now?" "Yes," he gasped. "Someone's outside. He knows my name. I need you to stay very quiet," she interrupted. "Do not make any noise." "Why didn't the police warn me?" Daniel asked, tears slipping down his face. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "They tried." The scratching started again, this time on the bathroom door. Slow. Deliberate. "He's been watching your routines for weeks," the operator continued softly. "He knew when you were supposed to be at work. Tonight was the only night your house would be empty." The doorknob began to turn. "Sir," the operator said, "help is not coming." The line went dead. The next morning, the street was filled with flashing lights. Daniel Mercer's front door was found wide open. There were no signs of a struggle. No body. Just a bright orange notice taped neatly to the inside of the door, one that read, "Warning issued. Subject no longer at risk." And on Hawthorne Lane, no one ever answered their door again. The apartment complex sat on the edge of the city, the kind of place people moved into when they needed something cheap, quiet, and temporary. Concrete walls, dim hallways, and a central courtyard that echoed every sound at night. Most units were occupied, but one had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. Unit 3B. It was directly across from 3A, where a graduate student named Daniel lived alone. From his front door, he could see straight into the dark rectangle of 3B's living room window. No curtains. No furniture. Just blackness. The landlord had told him it was uninhabitable. Water damage. Mold. Paperwork issues. Daniel didn't ask further. He liked knowing no one lived across from him. It made the hallway feel safer somehow. For the first few months, nothing unusual happened. The hallway stayed silent at night. The window across from him stayed dark. Dust gathered on the doorknob of 3B untouched. Then one night Daniel noticed the light. It was subtle. Easy to miss. He was brushing his teeth, glancing absently into the hallway mirror, when he caught a faint glow behind him. He turned. A dim yellowish light filled the living room of 3B. He stood there for a long moment, toothbrush hanging from his mouth, trying to reason it away. Maybe maintenance. Maybe the landlord finally rented it out. Still, it felt wrong. No moving truck. No voices. No footsteps. Just light. The next morning, the window was dark again. Daniel asked the landlord later that week. The man frowned and shook his head. Said no one had moved in. Said the unit was still sealed. Daniel didn't push. The lights returned a few nights later. This time Daniel was certain. He watched them flick on around midnight, soft and steady, illuminating bare walls. There were still no silhouettes. No movement. Just the suggestion that someone was there. Then came the first change. Daniel blinked. And the lights turned off. It happened so fast he questioned his own eyes. 1 second the room across from him was lit. The next pitch black. He stepped closer to his door, heart thudding, staring hard at the window. Nothing. He laughed it off, but the laugh sounded thin in the quiet hallway. After that, he started paying attention. Some nights the lights were on. Some nights they weren't. But whenever Daniel looked away, whenever he blinked or turned his head, they changed. On became off. Off became on. He tried testing it. Staring without blinking until his eyes burned. The light stayed on. The moment he squeezed his eyes shut, even for a second, darkness. He stopped sleeping well. A week later he saw movement. It was late. The building was silent. Daniel stood at his peephole, watching the window across the hall. The lights were on, brighter than before. Something shifted inside the room. A shape crossed the far wall, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing just out of full view. Daniel's mouth went dry. He whispered to himself that it was probably a trick of the light. Shadows from passing cars. Anything. Then the shape stopped. It stood facing the window. Daniel felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. He stepped back, breath shallow, heart racing. When he looked again, darkness. The next day he knocked on the landlord's door. Insisted something was wrong. That someone was using 3B. The landlord's patience snapped. He told Daniel the truth. Years ago, a man had lived in 3B. Quiet. Polite. Kept to himself. No visitors. No complaints. Then one winter, neighbors started reporting smells. The door was forced open. The man had died in his sleep. No signs of struggle. No cause anyone could identify. Just gone. After that, things happened. Tenants complained about lights, sounds, doors opening. No one stayed long enough for the landlord to bother renovating. Daniel asked why the unit wasn't sealed. The landlord didn't answer. That night, Daniel barricaded his door with a chair. He left the lights on. He didn't look across the hall. Around 2 a.m., the power in his apartment cut out. The hallway lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the floor. Daniel's eyes drifted, against his will, toward 3B. The lights were on. Not the soft yellow glow from before. Bright. Clinical. Like daylight trapped indoors. And there was a man standing in the window. He was tall and thin, wearing what looked like pajamas. His skin was pale, almost gray, stretched too tightly over his face. His eyes were open wide, unblinking. He wasn't moving. Daniel stared, frozen. The man didn't breathe. Didn't sway. Didn't blink. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them again, the man was closer. Right at the window now. Face pressed inches from the glass. His mouth hung slightly open as if caught mid-sentence. The lights went out. Daniel screamed. When neighbors rushed into the hallway, they found him curled against his door, shaking, unable to speak. 3B was dark. Silent. Empty. The police searched the unit. Dust on the floor. No footprints. No furniture. No sign anyone had been inside for years. Daniel moved out the next morning. But the story didn't end there. A new tenant moved into 3A a month later. She didn't know the history. Didn't know to avoid looking across the hall. On her third night, she noticed the lights. She told a friend on the phone that it was strange. That the unit was supposed to be empty. Then she paused. She said something about blinking. The call dropped. When police arrived, they found her standing in the hallway, staring at the dark window of 3B. Her eyes were bloodshot, wide open. She refused to blink. She kept whispering the same sentence over and over. If I look away, he moves. To this day, no one has been able to explain why the lights still turn on in an apartment with no power. Or why every tenant who looks too long across that hallway eventually moves out, or stops blinking entirely. And if you ever find yourself staring into a place that shouldn't be occupied, and you notice something change the moment you blink, don't look again. The first time the name appeared, Daniel thought it was a mistake. He had stopped at the motel because it was raining too hard to keep driving. One of those old roadside places that looked like it hadn't been updated since the late 90s. Flickering vacancy sign. Office window covered in yellowed flyers. The kind of motel people stayed in when they didn't want to be remembered. While the clerk checked him in, Daniel wandered over to the counter where a thick, leather-bound guest book sat open. Most of the pages were filled with messy handwriting. Truckers, traveling salesmen, families just passing through. That's when he saw it. Emily Carter. Room 12. Signed in yesterday. Daniel laughed under his breath at first. Emily Carter wasn't an uncommon name. That had to be it. A coincidence. But his sister Emily Carter had been missing for 5 years. No body. No arrest. Just an unfinished case file and a family that learned to live with silence. Daniel stared at the signature. His smile faded slowly. Because Emily had a habit. When she signed her name, she always looped the Y too far down and crossed her T at the very end, like she was finishing a sentence. The signature in the guest book did the exact same thing. Daniel felt the room tilt. He asked the clerk about it casually, like it didn't matter. "Hey," he said, tapping the page. "The woman who signed in yesterday, she's still here?" The clerk barely looked up. "Checked out early this morning." "Did you happen to notice anything about her?" The clerk shrugged. "People come and go. She paid cash. Didn't cause trouble." Daniel asked which room she'd stayed in. The clerk hesitated, then slid the key across the counter. "Room 12's empty. Cleaning hasn't been by yet." The hallway smelled like mildew and old cigarettes. The carpet squished under his shoes. When he reached room 12, the door was already unlocked. Inside, the room felt wrong. Not trashed. Not dirty. Just paused. Like someone had stepped out for a moment and forgotten to come back. The bed was neatly made, except for a shallow indentation on one side. The trash can was empty. No luggage. No clothes. In the bathroom, the mirror was fog-free, but on the sink counter sat a single object. A cheap silver necklace with a tiny crescent moon charm. Emily's necklace. Daniel recognized it instantly. She'd worn it every day since college. Their mother used to joke that she'd be buried in it. His hands shook as he picked it up. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. The next morning, he called the police. The officer who came out listened politely, took photos, wrote notes, but Daniel could tell he'd already decided what it was. A coincidence. A reused necklace. A shared name. The case went nowhere. But Daniel couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, he started checking motel guest books wherever he traveled for work. Cheap places. Forgettable places. And then it happened again. Different motel. Different town. Same name. Emily Carter. Always dated within the last 48 hours. Always signed in cursive with that looping Y. Sometimes there was a room number. Sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes there were small traces left behind. A hair tie on a nightstand. A receipt folded into a Bible drawer. A faint floral perfume Emily used to wear. Daniel started keeping photos. Notes. Locations pinned on a map. The sightings formed a loose trail. A path that didn't make sense. She never stayed longer than a night. Never showed up on security footage. Never used a credit card. Always cash. Always gone. One night, Daniel finally saw her. It was nearly midnight at a motel just off the highway. He was standing outside the office, staring at the guest book through the glass, when the door to room 7 creaked open. A woman stepped out. She looked thinner. Paler. Her hair was longer, hanging in dull strands around her face. But it was Emily. Daniel said her name without realizing it. She froze. Slowly, she turned toward him. Her eyes widened, not with relief but fear. "Daniel," she whispered. "You shouldn't be here." He took a step toward her. "Emily, we've been looking for you. For years." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand." Before he could say another word, she backed away toward her room. "Don't follow me," she said. "Please." Then she shut the door. Daniel ran to the office, pounding on the clerk's window, demanding a key to room 7. The clerk insisted the room was unoccupied. They argued. Raised voices. A small crowd formed. When the door to room 7 was finally opened, the room was empty. No sign anyone had been there at all. Except for the guest book. Emily Carter had signed out. The police reopened the case after that. Briefly. They reviewed the sightings. The photos. The motel records. Then they showed Daniel something he hadn't seen yet. A file from 5 years ago. Emily's car had been found abandoned near a motel. One Daniel had driven past dozens of times without noticing. The motel burned down 2 days after her disappearance. An electrical fire. Old wiring. 4 people died. Emily Carter was one of them. Dental records confirmed it. Daniel felt sick as the realization set in. Every motel he'd seen her name in had something in common. A history of fires. Gas leaks. Structural collapses. Fatal accidents covered up quietly. Places where people had died, and the building kept operating. The guest books weren't tracking where Emily was going. They were tracking where she had already been. Her signature wasn't a sign she was alive. It was a warning. Daniel stopped checking motels after that. Years passed. Then one night, exhausted and stranded by weather, He pulled into a roadside motel he swore he'd never seen before. The clerk slid a pen across the counter. "Just sign the guest book," he said. Daniel hesitated. On the last page, written in fresh ink, was a familiar looping signature. Emily Carter. Room 12. Checked in tonight. The clerk smiled faintly. "Room 12's waiting for you," he said. The night it happened was quiet in the way only bad nights are. Not peaceful, just empty. Marcus Adeyemi was driving home from a late shift, the kind that left his head buzzing and his body running on habit instead of thought. The road was a narrow two-lane stretch that cut through a wooded part of town most people avoided after dark. No street lights. No houses. Just trees pressed close to the asphalt, their branches knitting together overhead like they were trying to hide something. Marcus's phone had been acting up all evening. The battery indicator jumped between percentages, the screen dimmed on its own, and his music cut in and out. He kept telling himself it was nothing. Just an old phone, a long day, and a faster than usual drive home. Then the car stalled. No warning. No sputter. The engine just died. The headlights stayed on, throwing pale beams into the trees ahead, but the dashboard went dark. Marcus tried the ignition once. Twice. Nothing. He popped the hood and stepped out, the night air hitting him hard and cold, filled with the smell of damp leaves and dirt. He didn't know much about cars. After a minute of staring uselessly into the engine bay, he did the only thing he could think of. He got back in and pulled out his phone. No signal bars. Just the faint, emergency calls only message at the top of the screen. His hands hesitated for a second before dialing. The call connected faster than he expected. 911, what's your emergency? The voice was calm. Female. Professional. Too steady. Marcus opened his mouth to speak. Before a single sound left his throat, the operator continued. "Marcus Adeyemi," she said softly. He froze. There was a pause on the line, the faint sound of typing, then her voice again. Lower now, almost gentle. "Marcus, are you hurt?" He swallowed hard. How do you know my name?" Another pause. Longer this time. "We have your information," she replied. "You don't need to worry about that." Something about the way she said it made his skin crawl. Not reassuring. More like, final. "I haven't told you where I am," Marcus said. "My car broke down. I need help." "Yes," the operator said. "You're on Old Creek Road. Mile marker 17. Near the bend where the trees lean in." Marcus's eyes flicked up to the road ahead. That was exactly where he was. "How do you know that?" he asked. The line crackled softly. He thought he heard breathing, slow, controlled, like someone leaning very close to a microphone. "Marcus," she said, "I need you to listen carefully." Her tone changed. Not panicked. Not urgent. Careful. "There have been reports in your area tonight." "Reports of what?" "People stopping where you stopped." A cold weight settled in his chest. "What happens to them?" Another pause. "Marcus," she said, "are you alone in the vehicle?" He glanced at the passenger seat. The back seat. The empty space behind him reflected in the rearview mirror. "Yes," he said. "I'm alone." The typing resumed, faster now. "That's good," she said. "That's very good." Marcus's grip tightened around the phone. "Why?" "Because if you weren't," she said quietly, "we wouldn't be able to help you." His headlights flickered. He hadn't touched the switch. "Help me how?" he asked. The operator's voice dropped even lower. "I'm going to ask you some questions, Marcus. And I need you to answer them honestly." "Okay." "Did you see anyone on the road before your car stopped?" "No." "Did you hear anything?" "Knocking. Footsteps." "Your name?" "No," he said, then hesitated. "Wait. I thought I heard something. Like a voice. But it was probably my radio cutting out." The line went very quiet. When she spoke again, the calm was gone. "Marcus," she said, "I need you to lock your doors." He looked down. They were already locked. "I need you to keep your headlights on," she continued. "Do not turn them off for any reason." "Why?" "Because it makes it harder for them to get close." His heart started pounding. "Who is them?" The operator didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "Marcus, do you see anyone standing near the trees?" He looked. At first, nothing. just shadows layered over shadows. Then he noticed a shape where the road curved, a darker patch against the darkness, too tall to be a bush, too still to be an animal. Maybe, he said. I can't tell. That's okay, she replied quickly. Don't focus on it. Just keep looking straight ahead. The shape moved. Not toward the car. Sideways. Deeper into the trees. Marcus's breath came shallow now. You said help was coming. Yes, she said. But it's going to take time. How much time? Another pause. Marcus, she said slowly, you don't have much of that. A soft sound came through the phone then. Not static. A voice. It sounded like his. Faint. Distorted. Calling his name. He jerked the phone away from his ear. Did you hear that? Yes, the operator said. What was that? That, she replied, is why I know your name. Marcus's chest felt tight like something was sitting on it. What does that mean? It means, she said, that you already called once tonight. His mouth went dry. That's impossible. You called at 11:42 p.m., the operator continued. From this same location. I didn't. You were screaming, she said. You kept saying your name over and over, like you were afraid you'd forget it. The whispering outside the car grew louder. Marcus shook his head. This isn't funny. I know, the operator said. We lost the call when something reached the vehicle. The headlights flickered again, then steadied. Marcus, she said urgently, listen to me. Do not open the door. Do not respond if you hear your name. And whatever you do. A knock echoed through the car. 3 slow taps. From the driver's side window. Marcus screamed. Do not look directly at it, the operator finished. He squeezed his eyes shut, hands shaking, heart slamming so hard it hurt. It sounds like you, he whispered into the phone. I know, she said. That's how it works. The knocking stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the line went dead. The next call to 911 came in at 12:19 a.m. Same location. Same phone. The operator who answered didn't ask for a name. She already knew it. And this time there was no one left on the line to answer back. They moved into the house in early October, the kind of time when the air turns sharp and the nights feel longer than they should. It was a modest 2-story place at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, freshly repainted, newly carpeted, and priced low enough to feel like a small miracle. Mark and Elena had been searching for months. When they toured the house, nothing felt wrong. No strange smells. No cold spots. No uneasy silences. It felt empty in the ordinary way, like a place waiting to be lived in. Their dog, Baxter, disagreed almost immediately. Baxter was a 7-year-old mixed breed with a gentle temperament. He wasn't aggressive, wasn't anxious, and had never shown fear of new places. He'd handled apartments, road trips, and thunderstorms with the same easy calm. So when they opened the front door and Baxter froze on the threshold, it caught their attention. He stood stiff, ears pinned back, nose twitching. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just stared down the hallway, body trembling slightly. Come on, buddy, Mark said, giving the leash a gentle tug. Baxter stepped inside, but only far enough to plant his paws. His eyes never left the far end of the hall. They brushed it off as nerves. New smells. New echoes. Dogs took time to adjust. But that night, Baxter refused to go upstairs. Every time Mark tried to lead him up, Baxter dug his claws into the carpet and pulled back, low growls rumbling deep in his chest. Eventually, they gave up and set his bed at the foot of the stairs. He slept there, facing upward, eyes open. On the second night, they noticed something else. Baxter wouldn't go near the spare bedroom. The room was small, barely furnished. Just a closet, a single window, and a light fixture that hummed faintly when turned on. They planned to use it as storage until they figured out what to do with it. Whenever Baxter passed the open doorway, his pace slowed. His head dipped. His lips curled just enough to show teeth. Then late that night, around 2 in the morning, Elena woke to the sound of growling. Not the playful kind. Not the warning growl Baxter gave when someone knocked at the door. This was low. Sustained. Angry. She nudged Mark awake. Do you hear that? They followed the sound down the hallway to the spare bedroom. Baxter stood just outside the door, hackles raised, muscles tight. His eyes were locked on the closet. The closet door was closed. "Baxter," Mark whispered, kneeling beside him. "Hey, it's okay." Baxter didn't look at him. The growling intensified, vibrating through his chest like a warning meant for something else. Mark reached for the closet handle. Baxter snapped at his hand. That alone stopped him. Baxter had never snapped at anyone. Not once. They backed away, shut the bedroom door, and went back to bed with the uneasy feeling that something small had just shifted. The next few nights followed the same pattern. Baxter refused to enter the room during the day. At night, he positioned himself in the hallway, staring at the closed door. Sometimes he growled. Sometimes he whimpered softly as if confused. Then one night the growling stopped. Instead, they heard something else. A sound that didn't come from Baxter. It was faint at first. A low, breathy rumble coming from the spare room. Almost too quiet to identify. Elena sat up in bed, heart pounding. "Mark, do you hear that?" They stood in the hallway again, listening. The sound came from behind the closed bedroom door. It sounded like breathing. Slow. Deliberate. Too deep to be pipes. Too rhythmic to be air moving through vents. Baxter stood between them and the door, tail tucked, body shaking. Then the sound changed. Growled back. Not loud. Not sudden. Just enough to acknowledge Baxter's presence. Mark grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. The room was empty. The closet door stood slightly ajar. The breathing stopped instantly. They stood there for a long time, lights on, searching every corner. Nothing. No animals. No signs of entry. No explanation. They shut the closet, closed the door, and decided they were done ignoring it. The next day, Mark called the previous owner. The man hesitated when Mark mentioned the spare bedroom. "That room wasn't used much," he said carefully. "Why?" Mark asked. Another pause. "My wife didn't like it." "Did something happen there?" "No," the man said too quickly. "Not exactly." He offered no further explanation. That night, Baxter refused to leave Mark's side. He followed him from room to room, nails clicking on the floor, eyes constantly flicking toward the hallway. At exactly 2:11 a.m., the sound returned. Not breathing this time. Scratching. Slow. Methodical. From inside the closet. Elena clutched Mark's arm. "There's something in there." The scratching stopped. Then a whisper came through the door. It wasn't loud enough to make out words. Just a soft, broken sound, like someone testing their voice after a long silence. Baxter barked once, sharp and desperate, then backed away, pressing himself against the wall. Mark opened the door again. The closet door was open. Inside, carved into the back wall, were marks they hadn't seen before. Deep grooves etched into the wood. At the bottom of the marks were small, dark stains. They moved out 2 days later. The landlord was understanding. Too understanding. A month passed. Then 2. Baxter slowly returned to normal. Sleeping. Eating. Playing. But he refused to go near closets. Any closet. Even in new places. Even with the doors open. One evening, Elena received a message from a neighbor they'd met briefly while moving out. "I heard you left suddenly," it read. "Did you ever hear it?" "Hear what?" Elena replied. "The thing in the wall." Elena didn't respond. The neighbor sent another message. They found the body when the new tenants complained about the smell. Attached was a news link. A missing woman. Declared dead. Hidden behind the walls of a spare bedroom closet. Scratches on the wood. Fingernail fragments embedded deep. The article mentioned something else, almost as an afterthought. Neighbors reported hearing growling late at night. From inside the house. Not animal growling. Human. And Baxter, wherever he sleeps now, still growls at doors that don't have anything behind them. As if he's making sure nothing answers back. The delivery app logged the order at 11:43 p.m. It wasn't unusual for Malik to still be driving that late. Weekend nights paid better, and the quieter the city got, the fewer wrong turns he had to make. The order was simple: 1 bag of food from a closed-down strip of late-night restaurants, paid up front, generous tip already added. What caught his attention wasn't the food. It was the address. The app accepted it without hesitation, but when Malik tapped the navigation button, the map hesitated, then zoomed out, recalculated, and finally pinned a location on the far edge of town, past the last named street, beyond the grid where the city usually gave up and turned into darkness. He zoomed in. No street name. No house number visible on the map. Just a thin gray line cutting through a patch of black. Malik frowned and muttered to himself. That's not real. Still, the app didn't flag it. No warning. No error. And the tip was more than enough to justify checking it out. He started driving. The further he went, the quieter everything became. Streetlights thinned out, then disappeared altogether. Houses grew farther apart until there were none. The road narrowed, cracked down the middle like it hadn't been maintained in years. His phone signal dropped to 1 bar, then flickered. The GPS voice went silent. After another minute of driving, Malik slowed the car. Ahead of him, headlights revealed something that didn't belong. A house. It sat alone, just off the road, surrounded by tall grass that waved slightly even though there was no wind. The structure itself looked old but not abandoned. 2 stories. White siding that had yellowed with age. A porch light glowing softly like it had been waiting. Malik checked his phone. The app said he had arrived. He parked on the side of the road and sat there longer than he meant to. His instincts were prickling in that quiet, insistent way that made his chest feel tight. Houses didn't just exist out here. Not without roads. Not without neighbors. He grabbed the food anyway. The porch steps creaked loudly under his weight, each step sounding wrong in the open night. When he reached the door, he noticed there was no mailbox. No house number. No doorbell. He knocked. Almost immediately, the door opened. A man stood there, smiling. He looked normal enough at first glance. Middle-aged, neatly dressed, polite posture. But his smile was stretched just a little too wide, like it had been practiced in a mirror and never adjusted. "You're right on time," the man said. Malik nodded, holding out the bag. "Delivery for..." The man took the food before he could finish. "Thank you for finding us." The word "us" lingered. Malik forced a professional smile. "Yeah, no problem. Have a good night." He turned to leave. "Wait." The word wasn't loud, but it stopped him anyway. Malik looked back. The man was still smiling, but his eyes had shifted, glancing past Malik's shoulder, toward the road. "You came all this way," the man said. "It would be rude not to come inside for a moment." Malik shook his head. "I've got other orders." The man's smile tightened. "You won't. Not for a while." That was when Malik noticed something behind the man just past the doorway. The inside of the house wasn't dark. It was lit, but not by lamps or overhead lights. The glow came from deeper within, pale and uneven, like light reflecting off something wet. "I'm good," Malik said quickly. "Enjoy your food." He stepped back off the porch. The porch light went out. Not flickered, went out. The darkness pressed in instantly, thick and heavy. Malik's heart kicked hard as he turned and hurried toward his car. The grass rustled beside him, though he still couldn't feel any wind. When he reached the driver's door, he froze. The road was gone. Not hidden. Not hard to see. Gone. Where the cracked asphalt had been, there was only grass stretching endlessly into the dark. No tire marks. No path. Just field. Malik spun around, panic crawling up his throat. The house was still there. The porch light was back on. And the front door was open again. The man stood in the doorway, watching him patiently, like someone waiting for a lost guest to realize they were lost. "You can't leave yet," the man called out. "You haven't been checked out." Malik yanked his phone from his pocket. No signal. The delivery app was still open, still active, still showing the order as in progress. He tried to cancel it. The button grayed out. A message appeared beneath it. "Please complete delivery before exiting location." "I already did," Malik whispered. The man tilted his head. "No," he said gently. "You arrived. That's not the same thing." Malik backed away from the car, every instinct screaming at him to keep distance from the house, even as it felt like the only solid thing left in the world. The grass seemed taller now, brushing against his legs, tangling slightly when he tried to move too fast. From inside the house, Malik heard movement. More than one set of footsteps. Slow. Unhurried. The man stepped aside, holding the door open wider. "They get upset when people try to leave early." "Who?" Malik asked, his voice breaking. The man's smile returned fully. "The ones who ordered." Malik ran. He didn't know where he thought he was going, only that standing still felt worse. He pushed through the grass, lungs burning, heart hammering in his ears. Behind him, the house stayed visible no matter how far he went, the porch light hovering like a fixed star. His phone vibrated in his hand. A notification. Customer has updated delivery instructions. The screen flashed. Do not run. You'll only make it longer. Malik tripped. The grass tangled around his ankles, pulling him down hard. When he scrambled to his feet, the house was no longer behind him. It was in front of him. Close. So close he could see the peeling paint on the siding. The front door stood open, wider than before. Inside, the pale light pulsed faintly like breathing. Hands touched his shoulders. Not rough. Not violent. Guiding. We'll take it from here, a voice whispered near his ear. Not the man's voice. Something older. Thinner. Malik screamed, but the sound felt swallowed before it could leave his mouth. By morning, his car was found parked on the side of a dead-end road miles away from where he'd last been tracked. Engine cold. Doors locked. Phone inside on the passenger seat. The delivery app showed the order as completed at 12:07 a.m. The address no longer existed. Weeks later, another driver accepted a late-night order with a generous tip and a destination just beyond the edge of the map. The app didn't warn them either. The voicemail wasn't discovered right away. After Daniel Harris died, his phone sat untouched on the kitchen counter for almost a week. His daughter, Emily, couldn't bring herself to go through it. The screen was cracked, the case scuffed from years of use, and the lock screen photo still showed her and her dad at the beach, both squinting into the sun. She said it felt wrong to open it, like waking someone who was supposed to stay asleep. Daniel had died suddenly. A heart attack, according to the doctors. He'd been alone in his apartment when it happened, collapsed sometime during the night. By the time a neighbor noticed the smell and called for help, there was nothing anyone could do. The official time of death was listed as 2:14 a.m. Emily was 24, living 3 towns away, and she blamed herself for not calling more often. They spoke once or twice a week, usually about nothing important. Or groceries, the weather. Ordinary conversations that felt painfully precious after they were gone. It was Daniel's sister, Margaret, who finally insisted on checking the phone. They were sitting at the small dining table, surrounded by paperwork and half-filled boxes. Margaret picked it up carefully, like it might break if handled too roughly. There could be something important, she said. Contacts. Messages. We should at least look. Emily nodded but didn't watch. She stared at the wall while her aunt entered the passcode. Margaret scrolled quietly at first. Missed calls. Old text threads. Then she stopped. There's a voicemail, she said. Emily turned. From who? Margaret frowned at the screen. It doesn't say. Just, unknown. Emily hesitated. Daniel rarely got calls from unknown numbers. He hated spam and would hang up immediately if he didn't recognize a voice. Still, she leaned closer. When is it from? She asked. Margaret looked again. Her expression changed just slightly. It says, Tuesday night. At 2:31 a.m. Emily felt a hollow drop in her chest. That's not possible. That's what it says, Margaret replied. Daniel had been pronounced dead at 2:14 a.m. 17 minutes earlier. They sat in silence for a moment. Margaret tried to laugh it off, said phones glitch all the time, that timestamps get messed up. But neither of them reached to play it. Eventually, Emily did. The voicemail began with static. Low, crackling interference like the sound of wind brushing against a microphone. For a few seconds there was nothing else. Then came breathing. It was shallow and uneven, like someone struggling to catch their breath. There was a faint trembling sound, as if the phone was shaking in someone's hand. Emily felt her arms go cold. Then a voice spoke. Dad. It was her voice. Not similar. Not close. It was exactly her. The same pitch. The same slight rasp she'd had since childhood. Even the way the word cracked at the end sounded right. Dad, please, the voice whispered. I don't know where I am. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Emily couldn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the phone, her mind insisting this had to be some kind of mistake, some cruel coincidence. The voicemail continued. I tried calling Aunt Margaret, but it keeps going to voicemail. I don't know what's happening. It's dark. I think I'm outside, but I can't see anything. The breathing grew faster, more panicked. Dad, I'm scared. Emily shook her head slowly. I didn't make this call, she said, barely above a whisper. I swear I didn't. Margaret didn't respond. The voice on the recording began to cry. It wasn't loud or dramatic. Just quiet, broken sobs like someone trying not to be heard. The kind of crying that comes from fear, not sadness. "I think someone's here," the voice said. "I can hear them moving." There was a sound then, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps crunching on gravel. Slow. Deliberate. "Dad," the voice whispered again, more urgently now. If you get this, please come find me." The voicemail ended abruptly, cutting off in the middle of a breath. The room felt too small after that. Emily stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her heart was pounding, her hands trembling. "That's not funny," she said, though no one had laughed. "This isn't some kind of joke, right?" Margaret looked pale. "I don't understand how that's possible." They played it again. And again. Every time it sounded the same. Every inflection was right. Every pause. Even the way Emily sniffed when she cried. It matched the way she always did. Emily checked her own phone. Her call history showed nothing. No outgoing calls that night. No missed calls. Her location history placed her firmly in her apartment, asleep, just like she remembered. She hadn't been outside. She hadn't called her dad. And yet there was her voice, crying for help. 17 minutes after he died. They went to the police the next morning. The officer listened carefully, brows drawn together, fingers steepled under his chin. When it ended, he asked Emily a series of routine questions. Had she ever been sleepwalking? Did she drink? Take medication? Could someone have recorded her voice from somewhere else? Emily answered no to everything. The officer nodded slowly. "Voicemail timestamps can be unreliable," he said. "And voice similarity can be convincing, especially under stress." "It's not similar," Emily said. "It's mine." Still, without evidence of a crime, there was nothing they could do. That should have been the end of it. But 2 nights later, Emily woke up to her phone ringing. The time on the screen read 2:31 a.m. The caller ID said Dad. Her body went rigid. She stared at the screen, heart hammering so loudly it felt like it might drown out the ringtone. Her first instinct was that this had to be some delayed glitch, some leftover data surfacing at the worst possible moment. The phone stopped ringing. A voicemail notification appeared almost immediately. Emily didn't listen to it right away. She sat on the edge of her bed, breathing hard, trying to convince herself she was still dreaming. Eventually, with shaking fingers, she pressed play. Static. Breathing. Then her own voice again, but different this time. Hoarse. Strained. "Dad, I can't find my way back." There was a pause, followed by a sound like fabric brushing against a microphone. "I keep walking, but everything looks the same. I don't think this is outside anymore." Her breath hitched. "I can see the lights from your apartment. I've been walking toward them for so long." Emily's stomach twisted. Her father's apartment building had been demolished that morning. A gas line issue, the landlord said. Emergency teardown. The voicemail continued. "I don't think you can come get me," the voice whispered. "I think you're already gone." A soft, shaky sob followed. "But if you can hear this, please don't delete these messages." There was a long pause. Being forgotten feels worse than being lost. The call ended. Emily never received another voicemail after that. But she stopped sleeping through the night. Every time her phone buzzed or rang, her heart leapt into her throat. Months later, when Daniel's phone was finally wiped and recycled, the voicemail was gone. But Emily still swears that sometimes, when the house is quiet and the lights are off, she hears her phone vibrate faintly on the nightstand. And in that moment before she checks the screen, she feels an overwhelming certainty that somewhere, somehow, a version of her is still trying to get home. The wallet went missing on a Tuesday evening, the kind of forgettable day that never feels important until later. Ethan had stopped at a crowded roadside cafe on his way home from work. He paid in cash, grabbed his receipt, and didn't realize anything was wrong until hours later when he reached for his wallet and felt nothing but the empty fabric of his pocket. He retraced his steps mentally, car, cafe, front counter, bathroom, but by then the place was closed. He canceled his cards, told himself it was just bad luck, and went to bed annoyed but relieved that at least his apartment door was locked, his windows shut, his routine intact. 3 days passed. Then, on Friday night, there was a knock. It came just after 9 p.m., firm but unhurried. Not a neighbor's knock. Not impatient. Just deliberate. Ethan checked through the peephole. A man stood in the hallway holding something brown in both hands. Early 40s maybe. Clean jacket. Polite posture. The kind of face you wouldn't remember 5 minutes later. When Ethan opened the door, the man smiled softly. "You dropped this," he said, holding out the wallet. Relief washed over Ethan immediately. He thanked him, asked where he'd found it. "Outside the cafe on Route 9, the man said. "Figured you'd want it back." Everything seemed normal. The cash was still inside. Cards untouched. Even the old grocery receipt was still folded the same way. Ethan thanked him again. The man nodded, turned, and walked calmly down the hallway. No lingering. No small talk. The door closed. That should have been the end of it. Later that night, Ethan sat on his bed, absently flipping through the wallet, checking that nothing was missing. That's when he noticed the photos. Behind his driver's license, tucked into the back slot, were 3 printed photographs. Not Polaroids. Not glossy. Plain, slightly grainy prints, like they'd come from an old home printer. The first photo showed Ethan asleep on his side. The angle was close. Too close. His face was relaxed, mouth slightly open, arm draped over the edge of the mattress. The dim glow of his bedside lamp cast the same shadow that always fell across the wall. The blankets were exactly how he left them. The second photo showed him again from the foot of the bed this time. The third was taken from the doorway of his bedroom. All 3 were unmistakably inside his apartment. Inside his bedroom. Taken while he slept. Ethan didn't scream. He didn't move. He just sat there, staring, his hands trembling so badly the photos slipped onto the floor. He checked the locks. Deadbolt intact. Windows sealed. No signs of forced entry. Nothing missing. Nothing disturbed. Except the photos. He barely slept that night. The next morning he called the police. They took the wallet. The photos. Asked questions that went in circles. Had he given anyone a key? Had he lost the wallet before? Did he recognize the man? Ethan couldn't. Security cameras from the cafe showed the wallet falling from his pocket near the counter. The footage then cut to static for less than a minute. Nothing unusual, the manager said, before resuming. No footage of who picked it up. No fingerprints on the photos. The police said it was likely a prank. A sick one, but a prank. They suggested he stay with a friend. Ethan did. For a week. When he returned to his apartment, everything felt wrong. Not unsafe. Worse. Familiar but watched. He changed the locks. Installed a cheap security camera facing the hallway. Bought heavier curtains. He told himself paranoia was normal after something like that. 2 nights later, his phone buzzed at 2:14 a.m. It was a notification from the camera app. Motion detected. The video showed the hallway outside his apartment door. Empty. Then, slowly, a man stepped into frame. It was the same man from the hallway. Same jacket. Same calm posture. He stood directly in front of the door and looked straight into the camera. He raised his hand. And knocked. Ethan watched the live feed from his bedroom, heart hammering, body frozen. The knock echoed through the apartment. 1 knock. 2. 3. Then the man leaned closer to the camera and smiled. The motion alert stopped. By the time police arrived, the hallway was empty. They reviewed the footage. The man's face was clear. Too clear. Facial recognition came back with nothing. No record. No matches. The officers told Ethan to leave the apartment immediately. He packed essentials and moved into a motel that night. For a while nothing happened. Weeks passed. Then months. Ethan tried to forget. Until the envelope arrived. It was waiting on the motel room desk when he returned from work. No front desk receipt. No delivery slip. Inside were new photographs. 6 of them. Each one showed Ethan sleeping. Different locations. Different beds. The friend's couch. The motel room. Once in his car during a nap on his lunch break. The last photo was different. It showed Ethan standing in front of his bathroom mirror, eyes half open, phone in his hand. Taken from behind. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were 4 words. "Thank you for trusting me." Ethan never stayed in one place again. He changed cities. Jobs. His name. Years later, a man cleaning out an abandoned apartment found a wallet tucked inside a vent behind the bedroom wall. Inside were dozens of photographs. Different people. Different homes. All asleep. And one final picture. Fresh, clear, unmistakable. A man holding the camera reflected in a mirror. Smiling. Everyone who worked the night shift at the Ridgeway Commerce Complex knew his name. They just couldn't agree on what he looked like. Ridgeway was the kind of place that never truly slept. 3 warehouse buildings, a data storage facility, and a nearly empty office tower connected by long, poorly lit corridors. During the day it felt ordinary. At night it became something else entirely. Echoing footsteps, motion sensors that tripped for no reason, and the constant feeling that someone was watching from the far ends of the hallways. That was where the story started. The guard was called Miller. Or maybe Old Miller. Some said he'd been there longer than anyone else. Others said he was a temp who never left. New hires were always told the same thing during orientation. If you're on nights, you're not alone. Miller's got the other routes. No one ever questioned it. It was comforting in a way. The idea that someone else was walking those dark halls while you sat alone in a flickering security office. Evan Carter started working nights in early October. He was 26, recently laid off and desperate for steady pay. On his first shift, the supervisor handed him a badge, a radio, and a folded map of the patrol routes. "You'll be covering the East Wing and the loading bays," the supervisor said. "Miller's got the rest." Evan hesitated. "Who's Miller?" The supervisor didn't look up from his clipboard. "Night guard. You'll hear him on the radio." That was the end of the explanation. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. Evan did his rounds, checked doors, logged timestamps. Around 2:40 a.m. the radio crackled. "East Wing clear." The voice was low and flat, distorted by static. Evan stopped walking. He hadn't keyed his mic. Copy," Evan said after a second. Pause. Then, "Loading bays next." Evan felt a strange sense of relief. The voice sounded tired. Real. Like someone who'd done this job for years. Over the next few weeks, it became routine. Miller checked in every hour. Sometimes he made small comments about a door sticking, a light flickering, the cold creeping in through the walls. He never joked. Never asked questions. He just reported. Evan tried once. "Hey Miller," he said over the radio, half smiling to himself. "How long you been here?" Static hummed for a few seconds. "Long enough," the voice replied. That was all. Evan mentioned Miller during a break one night to another guard, a woman named Tasha who occasionally picked up extra shifts. She frowned. "You actually hear him?" "Yeah. All the time." "That's weird," she said. "I've never heard him." "You're on nights too." "Not anymore," Tasha replied. "I switched to swing shift. Day crew doesn't talk about him." That stuck with Evan. He started asking around. Quietly. Casual questions. Day guards shrugged. Supervisors avoided the topic. One older maintenance worker laughed nervously and said, "That story's still going?" "What story?" But the man had already walked away. One morning, after a long shift, Evan waited near the parking lot instead of leaving right away. He wanted to see Miller. Just once. Put a face to the voice. Sunrise came slowly, washing the building in pale orange light. Day shift arrived. Cars filled the lot. Doors opened. People laughed. Miller never showed. Evan checked the schedule online when he got home. There was only one night guard listed. Himself. The next night, Evan confronted it. "Miller," he said into the radio, forcing his voice steady. "What route are you on tonight?" Static crackled louder than usual. "Same as always," the voice replied. "That's not an answer." Silence. Evan swallowed. "I checked the schedule. You're not on it." For a moment, the radio was dead. Then the voice came back, closer this time. Clear. "They don't schedule what they don't see." Evan froze. The temperature in the hallway dropped suddenly, his breath fogging in front of him. The overhead lights flickered in sequence, one by one, stretching down the corridor like a warning. "Where are you right now?" Evan whispered. "Behind you," the radio said. Evan spun around. The hallway was empty. But the security monitor in the office wasn't. Camera 6, the one covering the east stairwell, showed a tall figure standing unnaturally still at the bottom of the stairs. The image was grainy, warped, like it didn't fully belong on the screen. The figure was wearing a security uniform. Evan's uniform. Same badge number. Same jacket. Except the face was wrong. It was pale, stretched, the features blurred as if the camera refused to focus on it. Its head tilted slowly upward, directly toward the camera. Toward Evan. The radio slipped from his hand as the voice spoke again, no static this time. You're late on your rounds. The stairwell door creaked open somewhere in the building. Evan ran. He didn't clock out. He didn't grab his jacket. He left the complex with the radio still buzzing on the desk, repeating the same phrase over and over in that calm, exhausted voice. East wing clear. East wing clear. Evan never came back. The company said he quit without notice. His badge was never returned. The incident report listed it as abandonment of post. But night guards still talk. They say that sometimes when the building is especially quiet, two voices check in over the radio now. One familiar, one new. And when morning comes, there's still no record of who was really on duty. Because whoever walks the other routes never shows up in daylight. And never has. The man's name was Daniel, and until that night, the worst thing he believed had ever happened to him was surviving a car accident he barely remembered. The crash had happened 2 years earlier on a rural highway outside the city. Daniel had been driving home late, exhausted, barely keeping his eyes open. A deer ran across the road. He swerved. The next thing he remembered was waking up in a hospital bed with cracked ribs, a concussion, and weeks of missing memory. The doctors told him he was lucky. His car had flipped into a shallow ravine. Someone passing by had called emergency services just in time. Daniel accepted that explanation easily. People always said trauma erased details. He never questioned what he couldn't remember. Until the Uber ride. It was nearly midnight when Daniel requested it. Rain slicked the streets, reflecting streetlights into long, blurry streaks. He was leaving a friend's apartment after a quiet dinner and didn't feel like walking the 3 miles home. The app matched him quickly. A gray sedan pulled up within minutes. The driver was an older man, maybe late 40s, early 50s. Clean-shaven. Calm eyes. He greeted Daniel politely and confirmed his name before pulling away from the curb. For the first few minutes, the ride was silent except for the soft hum of tires on wet asphalt. Daniel stared out the window, letting his mind drift. He almost dozed off. That was when the driver spoke. Strange place to come back from, the man said casually. Daniel blinked. Sorry? The driver didn't look at him. His eyes stayed fixed on the road. That stretch of highway. Lot of accidents there. Not many people walk away. Daniel felt a small prickle of unease. Yeah, he said slowly. I guess so. The driver nodded. Most folks don't even realize how close they came. A few feet in the wrong direction and it's a different outcome. Daniel shifted in his seat. Plenty of people talked during Uber rides. This wasn't unusual. Still, something about the man's tone felt rehearsed. Like he knew where this conversation was going. How long you been driving? Daniel asked. A while, the man replied. Long enough to hear stories people don't remember telling. Daniel chuckled politely, but his chest felt tight. He glanced at the rearview mirror and caught the driver's eyes. The man smiled faintly, then looked back at the road. They drove in silence again. A minute later, the driver spoke once more. They found you face down, he said. Near the ditch. Daniel's breath caught. What? He asked. The driver sighed as if realizing he'd said too much. Sorry? Force of habit. I shouldn't bring up things people don't like remembering. Daniel's heart started pounding. What did you say? The driver slowed slightly, rain pattering louder against the windshield. After the crash, he continued calmly, your door was crushed in. You crawled out. Made it a few steps before you collapsed. Daniel's mouth went dry. How do you know that? The driver finally glanced at him. Not startled. Not confused. Just observant. You told me, he said. I've never met you before, Daniel said quickly. The driver nodded. That's what you said back then too. The city lights thinned as they drove farther from downtown. Daniel realized they had taken a turn he didn't recognize. Hey, he said. This isn't the way to my place. It is, the driver replied. Just not the fastest one. Daniel's hand hovered near his phone. When did I tell you all this? The driver exhaled slowly. You didn't talk much at first. You were in shock. Kept saying you couldn't feel your legs. That you were cold. Daniel felt dizzy. His ears rang faintly. I was unconscious, he said. That's what the doctors told me. They don't know everything, the driver replied. They weren't there. The car passed a dark stretch of trees. Daniel's pulse hammered in his throat. Pull over, Daniel said. Right now. The driver didn't slow. You're mixing me up with someone else, Daniel continued, his voice shaking. I need you to pull over. The driver finally eased the car to the side of the road. Rain splashed against the windows. The engine idled. Daniel fumbled for the door handle. Before you go, the driver said quietly, you should know something. Daniel froze. You didn't survive right away, the man continued. You lay there for hours. Breathing. Bleeding. Waiting for help. Daniel turned slowly. That's not true. The driver met his eyes. They didn't find you when they said they did. Daniel's vision blurred. Stop. They buried you, the driver said. The words hit harder than any impact. What? Daniel whispered. The driver leaned back in his seat. Not officially. Not with a headstone. But after the tow truck came, after the police cleared the scene, someone else showed up. Daniel's stomach twisted. Who? The driver's voice dropped. A man who didn't want questions. Who didn't want reports. Who didn't want another problem tied to his name. Daniel shook his head. You're lying. I watched him drag you, the driver said. Just past the tree line. Soft ground. Shallow grave. Covered you with leaves and dirt like it was nothing. Daniel felt like he couldn't breathe. Why are you telling me this? Because you woke up, the driver replied. And that wasn't supposed to happen. Daniel slammed the door open and stumbled out into the rain. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. He backed away from the car, chest heaving. Stay away from me, he said. The driver rolled down the window. You clawed your way out, he said. That's the part you don't remember. You dug until your fingers bled. Until someone heard you. Daniel covered his ears. Shut up. They told the story differently, the driver went on. Cleaner. Easier. But the ground doesn't forget. Daniel turned and ran. He didn't look back. He didn't stop until he reached a gas station glowing like a sanctuary in the distance. He collapsed near the entrance, gasping for air, rain soaking through his clothes. When he finally gathered the courage to look toward the road, the gray sedan was gone. Daniel reported the incident the next day. The police took his statement seriously, but they found nothing. No driver matching the description. No record of the car. No alternate reports from the crash beyond what he'd already been told. Weeks passed. Daniel tried to convince himself it had been a cruel prank, or a stress-induced hallucination. Then the nightmare started. He dreamed of dirt filling his mouth. Of roots pressing against his face. Of hands scraping upward through darkness. One morning he woke with mud under his fingernails. Months later, driven by a terror he couldn't explain, Daniel returned to the highway. He walked past the ravine, past the guardrail, into the trees. The ground was uneven there, disturbed. He knelt and brushed away the leaves. Beneath them the soil was darker, softer. And deep in the earth, just beneath the surface, he found something that made him scream. A torn piece of fabric from the jacket he'd been wearing the night of the crash. The doctors said trauma can erase memories. They never talk about what happens when those memories start digging their way back out. The story of the missing hiker began on a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the sunlight filters through the trees and the air smells faintly of pine and damp earth. Jacob had been hiking the remote trails of the Whispering Pines National Park for years, always alone, always prepared. But this time something was different. His sister Clara had begged him not to go, citing some vague instinct she couldn't explain. He laughed it off, promised he'd be careful, and disappeared down the narrow dirt path, leaving behind the small cabin where they had stayed the night before. It wasn't until evening that anyone noticed Jacob hadn't returned. At first, his absence seemed ordinary. Hikers sometimes lose track of time, trails can be confusing. But when night fell and the forest grew dark, a chill settled over Clara and the small search party. They gathered flashlights, maps, and walkie-talkies, forming a line that snaked through the underbrush. The air was heavy, the silence punctuated only by snapping twigs and the distant hoot of an owl. Hours passed. They called his name, echoing across ridges and valleys, but there was no response. Nothing except the wind whispering through the leaves, almost like it was laughing. Then, near midnight, one of the volunteers spotted it. A small clearing in the woods, the outline of Jacob's tent barely visible under the moonlight. Relief and dread collided in the searchers' hearts. The tent was intact, the fabric slightly damp from dew, but the sight of it sent a shiver down everyone's spine. They approached cautiously. The tent flap was closed, yet a faint wisp of smoke or heat seemed to rise from it, almost like the warmth of a body still inside. Someone knocked lightly. "Jacob?" a voice called. There was no answer. They unzipped the tent, expecting to find him asleep, exhausted, maybe injured. But the interior was empty. No sleeping bag, no backpack, no sign that he had ever been inside. Yet the ground was warm like he had just left moments ago. Clara's stomach dropped. "That's impossible," she whispered, voice trembling. "I know he was here." The searchers spread out, scanning the surrounding trees, the undergrowth, the rocky ravines. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty space, twisted roots, and shadows that seemed to move when they weren't looking. Then came the first sign that something wasn't right. A faint footprint, too large for Jacob, pressed into the mud near the tent. It led toward the thickest part of the forest, the area no one dared enter because of the old legends. Stories of hikers who vanished, their tents found empty, their screams never heard. They followed the trail, hearts pounding, adrenaline sharp. The forest grew unnaturally quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Then a sound, a low, almost human groan, echoed from the trees. Someone froze, shining their flashlight in the direction of the noise, but saw nothing. Another groan, closer this time, like someone, or something, was moving just beyond the light's reach. And then they found it. A small clearing, circular, surrounded by gnarled trees that looked like they had been twisted over centuries. Jacob's backpack lay on the ground, torn open, supplies scattered. But he was gone. A whisper of movement caught Clara's eye. Something darted between the trees, a shadow that seemed too fast, too deliberate, too aware. She called out his name, but there was no response. Panic set in. The group tried to regroup, but it was like the forest itself was shifting, paths they thought they knew twisting into new directions. The warmth from the tent, it had not left. Hours later, exhausted and frightened, the search party made their way back to the main trail, leaving Jacob behind, lost somewhere in the dark heart of the forest. The authorities searched for days, combing every inch of the park, but all they found was the tent, still warm, still empty. No footprints leading away, no signs of a struggle, just a lingering heat that couldn't be explained. Weeks later, hikers reported seeing a lone figure moving through the trees, always just at the edge of the light, vanishing when approached. Sometimes at night, campers near the clearing swore they felt a warmth like a body pressing against the tent, and a whispering voice that sounded exactly like Jacob's name calling them into the dark. Clara never stopped looking. Every year, when the leaves turned and the sun began to fade, she returned to the clearing, hoping to find him. But the tent remained empty, the warmth lingering, and the forest kept its secret. Some say the trees remembered that the forest itself took him, and that the warmth is all that's left of his presence. A warning to anyone who dares to enter the whispering pines alone. Others say he's still out there, somewhere just beyond the reach of sight, waiting for someone to follow the path that leads into nothing. And the tent? It's still warm. No one who lived in that quiet suburban neighborhood could explain the strange events at Claire Thompson's apartment. Claire was an ordinary woman, living alone in a modest two-bedroom on the edge of town. She had no children, no pets, just a simple routine that kept her evenings quiet and predictable. But that all changed one Friday night, the kind of night when the air feels heavier than usual, and shadows seem to stretch a little too far. Claire had just finished an unusually long day at work. She was tired, her eyes dry from staring at a computer screen, but she always made herself a cup of tea before bed. As she poured the steaming water, she noticed something odd on her kitchen counter. A small package she hadn't seen before. It was unmarked, plain brown paper taped tightly. Curious, she tore it open, revealing a baby monitor. The kind with a camera, night vision, and a speaker. Confused, she set it down, thinking maybe it was a prank from her neighbor or a missed delivery. She tried to laugh it off. Who sends a baby monitor to someone without a baby? She muttered to herself. Later that night, Claire settled into bed. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of her heater. On a whim, she picked up the baby monitor from the counter. The small green light blinked on, and for a moment, nothing happened. She tilted the monitor toward her empty living room. Then very faintly she heard it. Claire. Her heart stopped. She froze. The voice was soft, almost like a whisper carried across the room, yet it clearly said her name. The speaker on the monitor crackled, but there was no background noise, no static, nothing that explained how a voice could come from a baby monitor in an empty apartment. Claire laughed nervously. Okay, that's enough, whoever's pranking me. But there was no reply. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Over the next few nights, it got worse. Every evening, just as the clock ticked past midnight, the monitor would turn on by itself. And every evening, a whisper, her name, would drift through the speaker. She tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was her imagination, stress from work, or some technical glitch. But the voice began to change. It stopped saying just her name. Soon it started saying things like, I see you. Don't turn around. Come to me. Claire would sit frozen, staring at the monitor, heart pounding. Her apartment felt wrong. Rooms seemed colder, shadows longer. The creaks and groans of her building suddenly felt deliberate, purposeful. One night, desperate, she unplugged the monitor and shoved it into a closet. For a few hours, nothing happened. Relief washed over her. Maybe it had been a faulty device all along. Then, just as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard it. Claire. This time, the voice wasn't coming from the monitor. It was coming from behind her. She bolted upright, swinging her legs off the bed, her eyes scanning the darkness. The apartment was still. The closet door where she had hidden the monitor was shut. Her phone was on the nightstand, the screen dark. Every rational part of her mind screamed that it had to be her imagination. But the sound had been too real, too close. Shaking, she grabbed a flashlight and crept to the closet. Her hand trembled as she swung the door open. The baby monitor lay on the floor, face down, the screen lit up with a faint green glow. She picked it up. The speaker crackled, and then whispered once more. Why are you hiding from me? Claire dropped the monitor. The sound echoed in the empty room, a distorted, chilling laughter following it. Her heart raced as she ran to the door, fumbling with the lock. She flung it open and sprinted into the hallway. The building was empty. No one in the stairwell. No one in the lobby. Just silence, thick and suffocating. She tried to call the police, but her phone was dead, battery gone in seconds. She ran back upstairs, desperate, only to find her bedroom door wide open. And on her bed, sat the monitor, perfectly upright, facing the door. The green light blinking slowly, steadily. And through the speaker, a voice she would never forget. Come to me, Claire. She never stayed in that apartment again. Later, when friends asked about the strange package and the monitor, she hesitated, then lied, saying it must have been a mistake. She never mentioned the voice. But she didn't need to. Every night afterward, she would hear it in her dreams, whispering her name, calling her back. And the worst part? The monitor had never left the apartment building. It remained in that room, waiting, glowing faintly in the dark, and waiting for the next person who would hear their name. It started as an ordinary Friday night for Jessica, a young woman living alone in her apartment downtown. She worked late, long shifts at a local bookstore, and by the time she got home she was exhausted. Her nightly routine was simple. She'd shower, set an alarm, and collapse into bed, ready to sleep through the night without a care. That night she followed the routine. Shower, pajamas, brushing her teeth, then crawling under the warm covers. She double-checked her locks, set her alarm, and turned off the lights. By all accounts, it was just another ordinary night. Jessica didn't wake up until Saturday morning. But when she opened her eyes, something felt off. Her room was still dark and the clock glared back at her, 7:03 a.m. She'd slept soundly as usual, with no strange dreams to report. Everything seemed normal, until she received the email. It was from her building's management. The security footage from the night before had been sent to all residents for a routine check. Jessica clicked the video thinking it was just a standard reminder. The footage showed the lobby at 2:17 a.m., her key card sliding through the reader. She entered the building. She walked to the elevator. The timestamp blinked. 2 hours 17 minutes and 32 seconds. 2 hours 17 minutes and 47 seconds. 2:18:03. She froze. She had not left her apartment. Not once. She had gone to bed at 11:45 p.m. The timestamp clearly proved that the woman on camera, the one swiping her key card, pressing the elevator button and walking down the hall, was her. Her hands shook as she scrolled forward, watching herself ride the elevator, exit on the 3rd floor, and turn the corner toward her apartment door. She keyed in her code, opened the door, and disappeared inside. But when she checked her bedroom, the lights were still off. Her alarm clock hadn't been touched. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. Jessica called her friend, Leah, who lived nearby, hoping for some explanation. "Maybe it's a glitch," Leah said after watching the footage herself. "Security cameras mess up sometimes. Maybe it recorded a ghost image or something." Jessica didn't laugh. She couldn't. Over the next few nights, she noticed strange things. Small things at first. Her keys weren't where she'd left them. Her phone charger unplugged itself. One night, she woke up to the soft sound of breathing, though she lived alone. Every time she checked the security footage after that, she saw her. Always the same, the key card, the elevator, the hallway. Always at times when she was supposedly asleep. It got worse. She started receiving packages she hadn't ordered. A box of shoes she didn't recognize. A sweater folded neatly inside a plastic bag. The return addresses were always empty fields. She'd leave them by the door, only to find them moved to her bed by morning. One night, desperate, she set up a hidden camera inside her apartment, pointed directly at the bed. She went to sleep, determined to catch whatever, or whoever, was behind this. When she woke up the next morning, the footage had vanished. Completely erased. Except for one short clip saved to her phone. Herself, sitting up in bed, eyes wide open, staring at something, or someone, standing at the foot of the bed. Jessica didn't recognize the figure. It was tall, pale, unnaturally still. And she could feel, from the way her own body reacted in the footage, that she wasn't asleep. She wasn't controlling herself. Her arms moved on their own, reaching toward the figure. The camera fell to the floor. The clip ended. She called the police. They examined the apartment, the locks, the cameras, everything. Nothing. No sign of break-in. No fingerprints. No forced entry. The only thing they found was her own key card lying in the hallway, swiped at 2:17 a.m. Jessica moved out the next week. She left behind the apartment, the footage, the packages, everything. But even in her new place, she had trouble sleeping. And every time she closed her eyes, she could see herself from the security footage, moving on autopilot, reaching toward something she couldn't see. Months later, she got another email. This time, it wasn't from the building management. It was just a video file, unnamed, no message. With trembling hands, she opened it. The footage showed her bedroom, her bed. The timestamp blinked 2:17 a.m. And there she was, sitting up, eyes wide open, staring at the doorway. And behind her, herself, asleep, exactly where she should have been. Jessica didn't watch the rest. She deleted the file. She tried to forget. But at night, when the room goes quiet and dark, she sometimes feels the weight of someone sitting at the foot of her bed. And she knows she isn't alone. She never has been. The locals called it the last stop. Nobody talked about it much, but if you asked around, everyone seemed to know the rule, at least everyone except the strangers who ended up on the wrong train. It started with a young man named Caleb. He was new in town visiting for work, and had little time for the small superstitions of the sleepy railway village. Caleb was in a rush that evening, boarding the last train out of the station just as the sun dipped behind the hills. The train rattled along the tracks, empty cars echoing with the occasional cough or shuffle of feet. Nothing seemed unusual at first. But then about 20 minutes into the ride, the lights flickered. Just for a second, but enough to make Caleb glance up. The conductor, a pale man with tired eyes, gave him a curt nod but didn't speak. It was only when the train slowed to a halt, long before it reached any station, that Caleb noticed the silence. Absolute silence. No engine hum, no distant chatter, nothing. That's when he heard the whispers. At first, he thought it was other passengers talking, but the words were too soft, almost like they were speaking through the walls of the car itself. "You shouldn't be here." Caleb's stomach tightened. He looked around. The other cars were empty. Just him. And the conductor, who was now staring out the window with an unreadable expression. A few moments passed. Then the door at the far end of the car creaked open and a figure stepped in. A woman. Her clothes were damp, like she had been standing in the rain, and her hair clung to her face. She didn't say anything. She just walked slowly down the aisle, past him, staring straight ahead as though he wasn't even there. The train remained still, though he could feel the vibration of the tracks underneath. Caleb's heart hammered as the woman stopped near the back and turned. Her eyes were hollow, dark, but when they focused on him, he felt like the air had been pulled from his lungs. "I've been waiting," she whispered. Before he could respond, the train jolted violently. Caleb fell forward, barely catching himself on the railing. The lights went out entirely. And in that darkness, he heard it. The sharp, metallic scream of brakes grinding against rails, the sudden thud of something heavy hitting the tracks. When the lights flickered back on, the woman was gone. The conductor, calm and almost bored, said, "It only stops when it has to. Don't ask why." Caleb didn't. Not then. He spent the rest of the ride frozen, staring out the window at the blur of trees and shadows, trying to convince himself it was just exhaustion. He never spoke of it, until a week later when he read the newspaper. A train had derailed somewhere along that same stretch, and the article mentioned a man who had been fatally struck while crossing the tracks. His description matched the woman he'd seen, down to her wet coat and hollow eyes. Locals said she had been trying to get home and somehow the train had stopped for her. Caleb realized, with a chill creeping up his spine, that it wasn't just coincidence. The train didn't stop for accidents. It didn't stop for delays. It only stopped when someone was about to die. And then the twist came, the part that kept him awake for nights. The next time he rode that line months later, the train stopped again. Same empty silence, same flickering lights. But this time, when the conductor looked at him, he didn't nod. He simply said, "You're next." Caleb bolted. But the train, it didn't move until he had stepped off at a side track no map would show him. After that, he never returned to the railway. But he still tells people about it in hushed tones, warning them, the train has its own rules. It sees who is marked. And sometimes, even if you get off, you can never really escape what it was waiting for. Because the truth of the last stop is simple. It's not just a train. It's a messenger. And it only stops when death is near. Caleb never rode that line again. But every time he hears the distant rumble of a train, he feels a chill. Somewhere out there, the last stop is still waiting. And one day it will stop for you too. It all started when a small-town journalist named Claire stumbled across an old crime archive while doing research for a piece on cold cases. She wasn't looking for anything unusual, just dusty reports, faded photographs, and the kind of paperwork that would put most people to sleep. But then, tucked into one of the folders, she saw something that made her stomach turn. It was a crime scene photo. The timestamp on the report caught her eye immediately, March 12, 2035. 10 years from now. At first, she thought it was a typo. After all, misprints happen all the time. But then she looked at the image itself. The photograph was grainy, the kind of black and white evidence photo the police take when a scene is too horrific to capture in color. And standing out among the debris, the overturned furniture, and the police tape, was a house, Claire's childhood home. Not a house like hers, but hers. Every detail matched perfectly. The cracked porch step by the front door, the rusted mailbox with her name still barely visible, the oak tree that leaned slightly to the left, just like it did when she was a kid. She hadn't been there in years, had no reason to return, and yet, here it was, documented in a police report dated a decade in the future. She called her friend, David, a detective at the local precinct. "You have to see this," she said, her voice shaking. "I found a photo of my house. But the report, it's dated 10 years from now." David frowned. "Are you messing with me?" "I'm serious. Look at this." She emailed him the scanned image. There was a long pause on the other end. Then David finally said, "Claire, that's impossible. That photo was taken 10 years from now." "I know," she whispered. "I don't know how it's even possible." David promised he'd check it out, said he'd see if there was any way it could be a clerical error. But deep down, neither of them believed it was a mistake. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about that photo, turning it over in her mind. The house in the image looked abandoned, darkened windows staring back like eyes. And she remembered the rumors as a child, the whispered stories about the house being cursed, about strange lights at night, shadows moving behind the curtains, sounds that didn't belong to any normal house. She'd laughed them off as a kid, dismissed the fear as imagination. But now, staring at that photo, the stories came rushing back with terrifying clarity. The next morning, she drove past the old neighborhood. The house looked exactly the same, the way it always had. But something was off. The air around it felt wrong. Static. Heavy. She couldn't explain it, but she felt like she was being watched. David called later that day. "Claire, I looked into it," he said. "No clerical error. The report exists in the official database. Someone, or something, submitted a crime scene report for your house, dated 10 years from now. The address matches exactly. We've run every check we could think of. It's real." Claire didn't sleep that night either. She kept imagining what could possibly happen to her childhood home a decade from now. Who would break in? Who would be hurt? Weeks passed. The photograph haunted her. And then one night she heard it, the faint sound of a child laughing outside her apartment window. At first she thought it was the neighbor's kid. But the sound was wrong, older somehow but small at the same time. The way it echoed sent shivers down her spine. She ignored it, tried to convince herself it was nothing. But the next morning she saw it. On the front page of the online local news, a fire at her childhood home. One confirmed death. Details emerging. Her breath caught. She read on. The article described the scene. The overturned furniture, the burnt oak tree, the mailbox melted into twisted iron. Every detail matched the photograph she had seen weeks ago. Every detail. Claire's phone vibrated with a message from David. It was short, almost too cold. "We found the bodies." Phew. She dropped her phone. Her hands shook. Her mind reeled. How could this be happening? How could a report dated 10 years in the future come true? How could it lead to her death? The article continued. Neighbors reported seeing a young woman inside the house the night of the fire. But no one recognized her. They described someone who looked exactly like Claire. Someone alive. Someone from the past. Claire didn't know how to explain it. And then she realized the worst part. She hadn't been inside the house. Not for years. But the house had found her. The next morning, police found the charred remains of her childhood home, and nothing else. No trace of her. No trace of anyone else. Just the twisted metal of a mailbox, the burned oak tree, and a photograph that had somehow predicted everything. And in the archive, the original report remained. Dated March 12, 2015. The same day as the fire. No one could explain it. Not David. Not the police. Not Claire. But one thing was certain. Some houses remember. And sometimes they make sure the future catches up with you. It started subtly, like a whisper of wind through the cracks of an old house. Sarah had moved into the rental on the edge of town 6 months earlier. The place had character, or at least that's what she told herself when the drafty windows rattled in the winter nights. It was an old 2-story home with a small attic, just above her bedroom. She never went up there. No reason to. The door was tucked into the corner of the hallway, heavy and uninviting. And yet, every night, just as she was drifting off, she began hearing it, a voice. At first, she thought it was her imagination. A creak of the floorboards, the settling of the house, maybe a stray branch scraping against the roof. But then the whispers became words. Not ordinary words either. Specific words. Questions. Questions she had never spoken aloud. Do you remember the fight with your sister? Sarah froze, heart hammering. She hadn't mentioned that argument to anyone. Not her friends, not her colleagues. How could someone know? The voice wasn't angry or even malicious. It was calm. Familiar. Almost knowing. The first few nights, she told herself she was crazy. She laughed nervously to friends on the phone, blaming stress, long hours, and the creaking of an old house. But the questions kept coming. Are you afraid of being alone tonight? She would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, convinced it was someone in the house. But no one ever came. No footsteps. No shadows. Just that voice, soft, patient, and unnervingly precise. It started to escalate. The questions became statements. Statements that revealed things she hadn't told anyone. Secrets she had buried so deeply she had almost forgotten them herself. He doesn't love you the way you think he does, it said one night. She froze, a cold knot forming in her stomach. That was true. But how could anyone know that? She hadn't told anyone. Not even her closest friends. The fear became suffocating. She stopped inviting people over. She stopped answering the phone. Every night, she lay in bed waiting for the voice. And it never failed to come. You're thinking about leaving him. You will tomorrow. One night, she gathered the courage to climb the narrow stairs to the attic. She wanted proof that it was just her imagination, that there was nothing up there. The door groaned as she pushed it open, and the attic was empty, just dusty floorboards, old boxes, and cobwebs. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. And yet, the voice came again, clearer than ever. Why are you here, Sarah? Her hands shook. She backed away. Her pulse was a drum in her ears. She had no idea how it knew her name. No idea how it could speak directly to her, answer questions she hadn't asked, reveal thoughts she hadn't shared. She called a friend, desperate, rambling about the voice. Her friend laughed, thinking it was a joke. But when she whispered the questions into the phone, her friend's voice went cold. Sarah, how do you know these things? The next day, Sarah packed a bag. She told herself she'd leave town, stay with family, anywhere but that house. She double-checked the attic door, locked it, and tried to push the thought away. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe she had just lost her mind. But the unease lingered. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard it again. You're leaving, aren't you? She froze. Her fingers tightened around the sheets. The voice was closer now, as if it had moved down from the attic. The words weren't just coming from above, they were in the room. You can't leave, Sarah. Her blood ran cold. She jumped out of bed, flicked on every light. The house was empty. But the voice persisted. Whispering. Waiting. Always knowing. I know what you're thinking right now. I know your fear. I know your plans. And you'll never escape. Sarah never spoke of it again. She moved out eventually, found another apartment across town. But the strange thing, people who visited that house later reported hearing whispers from the attic. Questions they hadn't asked. Confessions they hadn't made. And on the rare nights when the wind was right, the voice seemed to drift out, soft and patient, waiting for the next tenant to think it, and unknowingly speak it aloud. No one knows who, or what, lives in that attic. And maybe some things are meant to stay in the dark, quietly listening, knowing every thought you try to keep hidden. Because in that house, the attic is always awake. And the voice always knows. Sheila had always been cautious with online dating. After a messy breakup, she swore off swiping for months. But loneliness has a way of creeping in, subtle and persistent, until one rainy evening she found herself scrolling again. That's when she saw him, Ryan. His profile wasn't extraordinary, just the kind of calm, familiar face that might belong to someone trustworthy. Something about his smile, the gentle way he looked at the camera, made her tap the like button. A few hours later they matched. Their conversation started casually, compliments, light jokes, questions about music and favorite movies. Ryan seemed genuinely interested, polite, attentive. He asked if they could meet for coffee the next day. Sheila hesitated but agreed. They chose a small cafe downtown, nothing fancy, quiet enough to hear themselves think. When she arrived, Ryan was already there, sitting in a corner with a coffee cup in hand, looking up as she walked in. His eyes were oddly familiar, though she couldn't place why. The meeting went smoothly. Ryan laughed at her jokes, complimented her taste in books, and when he leaned in slightly, she felt a spark she hadn't felt in years. But then, as they were saying goodbye, he hesitated. His smile faltered. "Can I ask you something strange?" he said. "Sure," Sheila replied, curious. When you died," he whispered. She froze. Her heart stuttered in confusion. "I saw you," he said, voice trembling slightly. "At your funeral." I couldn't stop staring. You looked so peaceful." Sheila blinked, thinking she'd misheard. What? "I know this sounds insane," he said quickly, "but I remember what you were wearing. That dress, the one with the little lace trim. And your necklace. You were beautiful." Her stomach sank. She hadn't told anyone about the accident. Only her family, a few close friends, nobody from the outside world. How do you know about that?" she asked, voice barely audible. Ryan's eyes flicked around nervously. I don't know. I was there. There it was. The word she never wanted to hear. A sick feeling twisted in her chest. He was at her funeral. "I don't understand," she whispered, shaking. Ryan leaned closer. I just wanted to see you one more time. I didn't mean any harm. I just couldn't let it go." Sheila felt her hands tremble. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to run, but curiosity, a morbid, dangerous curiosity, kept her seated. She needed to know how much he knew. Why were you there?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ryan's gaze dropped to his coffee cup. I wasn't supposed to. I didn't plan it. I just followed the news. I heard about the accident. And when everyone else was crying, I had to see you." Sheila's throat tightened. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too quiet, the air heavy with tension. She wanted to leave, to escape the suffocating familiarity of someone who shouldn't exist in her life. But before she could stand, Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was a photo. Her heart stopped. The photo showed the coffin. Her coffin. And there she was inside, perfectly still, dressed exactly as Ryan had described, her family gathered around. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was a man she didn't recognize, watching. Smiling. That's impossible," she stammered. Ryan's face paled. I didn't take it. I swear. I just found it." Sheila felt bow rise in her throat. "Found it, where?" Ryan shook his head, voice shaking. "I don't know. In an envelope, slipped under my door this morning. I didn't open it at first, but I had to see. I had to know." Sheila's mind raced. Everything about this was wrong. The coincidence was impossible. No one outside her inner circle could have known the details of her funeral. And yet here it was, proof that someone had. Someone had been watching. She forced herself to stand. I need to go," she said. Ryan stood too, but his hands shook. "Wait, don't go. Please. I can't," she whispered, voice trembling. "I don't know who you are. I don't know what this is." Sheila walked out into the drizzle, heart pounding, the streetlights reflecting in the wet pavement. She tried to shake the fear, tried to tell herself it was coincidence. But the image of that photo, of that stranger watching her even in death, burned in her mind. That night, back in her apartment, she checked her messages. Nothing from Ryan. No missed calls. Just the uneasy silence of her phone. And then a notification appeared, a new photo sent anonymously. It was her, sitting on her couch, scrolling her phone. And in the background, barely visible in the shadow of the hallway, someone was standing, watching, smiling. Sheila dropped the phone. She didn't sleep that night, and she never swiped again. It was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least they thought they did. Rain was common in late spring, and it seemed to fall more often than anyone cared to remember. For one woman, Emily, the rain brought with it a visitor she would never forget. It started one Tuesday evening. She was sitting in her living room, curled up with a blanket, listening to the storm tapping on the roof. That's when she heard it, a sharp, deliberate knock at her door. Emily froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. The storm had been rolling for hours, and most people stayed tucked inside during nights like this. The knock came again, louder this time. Firm. Insistent. She checked the window. Nothing. Not a soul in sight, only the shadows of swaying trees and the blur of rain. The next morning, her neighbor mentioned something odd. "I think someone's been knocking on your door last night," he said casually. Emily laughed it off. Maybe it was a prank, she thought, a wandering drunk or a kid testing her nerves. But when the next storm hit, the knock returned. And it wasn't random. It always came when it rained, always around the same hour. Weeks went by. The knocks continued, relentless, predictable. Emily never answered. Sometimes she'd peek through the blinds and see a man standing on her porch, just out of reach of the light. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like an old, dark coat. His face was always obscured, either by shadow or the angle he stood. He never said a word. He simply waited. Then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he would disappear into the rain. Emily tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was lost or lonely or sick. But the pattern unsettled her. Rainy nights became nights of dread. She slept with the lights on, checked locks 3 times, even considered leaving town for a few days. Nothing worked. Every storm brought him back. Then one night something changed. The storm was heavier than usual. Thunder shook the windows, lightning illuminated the street like a strobe. And there he was, exactly where he always stood. But this time, Emily's fear mixed with a strange determination. "I'm opening the door," she whispered to herself. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, the wooden floor creaking beneath her. She reached for the doorknob, hesitated for a second, then pulled it open. The rain hit her first, cold and sharp, washing over her hands and face. But the porch was empty. No man. No shadow. Nothing. Just the wind and the relentless rain. Relieved, she closed the door, thinking maybe he'd finally gone. But then a voice, low, dry, almost a whisper, slid through the wet air. "You shouldn't have done that." Emily froze. Her breath caught. The sound seemed to come from all around her, yet nowhere at once. She flung the door open again, searching, but the street was empty, the storm raging like nothing had happened. She told herself it was her imagination. Fear plays tricks. But the next night the storm returned, and so did the knock. This time, faster, more insistent. And then she noticed something she hadn't before. The knocks weren't coming from the door. They were coming from inside the house. Emily's hands shook as she slowly moved toward the living room. Her eyes darted to the window and then to the dark hallway leading to the bedrooms. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything but go forward. But curiosity, and maybe some stubborn defiance, pushed her along. The sound stopped the moment she reached the living room. Silence. Her heart thundering, she turned toward the hallway and then she saw it. Marks in the floor. Wet, muddy footprints leading from the door, straight into her bedroom. And then disappearing. Emily never saw him again. At least not physically. But the knock never truly left. On rainy nights, when the wind rattled the windows and the thunder shook the walls, she could hear it. Faint, rhythmic, insistent. Coming from the bedroom, the hallway, the very walls around her. And sometimes, if she listened closely, she could hear the whisper too. "You shouldn't have opened the door." She moved out eventually, leaving the house behind. But she couldn't leave the sound in the rain. It followed her. Some nights, long after the storm had passed, she swore she could hear those knocks echoing through her new apartment. And when the rain finally came again, she would pull the blankets over her head and pray that he wouldn't be there, because he always came when it rained. And now she knew he would always come for her. It started innocently enough. Every morning, Alex would get into his car and drive to work, never thinking twice about the small neighborhood he lived in. But then the first note appeared. Tucked under his windshield wiper, folded neatly, with handwriting that was strangely familiar yet unsettling. It said, "Be careful today." At first he laughed it off. Maybe some neighbor thought it would be funny. But the next day another note. This one said, "Watch the road. Don't speed." Still harmless, just oddly specific. By the third day, Alex was uneasy. The notes kept coming, each more precise than the last. They warned him about things he hadn't even thought about. Check your mirrors. Don't go out after dark. He asked around casually if anyone knew who was leaving them. No one had seen anything. A week passed and then the note stopped for 2 days. Alex felt relieved, almost foolish for worrying. But when he returned to his car one evening, there it was. A folded note, heavier than the others, as if it had been pressed with force under the wiper. He unfolded it slowly. "Do not drive home tonight." Panic settled in. That night, he stayed late at the office, telling himself it was probably just a sick joke. But when he finally mustered the courage to leave, he noticed a figure standing at the end of his street, just out of the streetlight's glow. A tall silhouette, unmoving, watching. Alex tried to ignore it, telling himself it was a neighbor or some passerby. But as he drove, the figure appeared again. Closer this time, almost at the edge of his vision. Every turn he took, every street he passed, there it was, silent, patient, following him. By the time he reached his driveway, Alex's hands were shaking. He parked and didn't breathe until the engine was off. That's when he saw it. Another note, this one slid under his car door. "You shouldn't have left the office. You shouldn't have left the car." He froze. His neighbor? No, this handwriting wasn't familiar anymore. It was sharp, jagged, threatening in its familiarity. Alex didn't sleep that night. He kept the lights on, doors locked, listening to every creak and whisper. Around 2 a.m. he thought he heard footsteps outside his window. Slow, deliberate, pausing at each corner. He didn't dare look. The next morning, the mailman found him unconscious on the porch. He had no memory of leaving the house or walking outside. The police didn't find any signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing that explained how he ended up there. But there was one thing, his car. The driver's seat was pushed all the way back. The ignition was on. And in the passenger seat, a new note, perfectly folded. "Next time listen." Alex moved away shortly after, leaving the neighborhood forever. But sometimes, late at night, he swore he could hear the faint scratching of a pen under a windshield wiper, and he knew someone had been watching, waiting, writing, and they hadn't stopped. Even now, he avoids parked cars entirely, afraid of what might be hiding under the wiper. Because sometimes warnings aren't meant to keep you safe, they're meant to test you. And if you ignore them, well, that's when it stops being a warning. Hospitals have a way of feeling both familiar and unnerving. The smell of antiseptic, the faint hum of machines, the endless fluorescent lights that never truly warm a room, it all gives the impression that you are safe. That is, until you step into a place that wasn't meant to exist. It began with Emma, a young nurse who had just started her night shift at St. Augustine Medical Center. She had worked in hospitals before, but something about this one always made her uneasy. She told herself it was just nerves, new place, long hours, but deep down there was a tension she couldn't shake. One night, during a routine check, she noticed a patient list that didn't match the floor she was assigned to. The chart included room 314B, a room she had never seen on any floor plan, never walked past, and never heard mentioned by anyone. Curious, she asked the head nurse about it the next day. 314B? The nurse said, frowning. That room doesn't exist. Emma laughed nervously, assuming it was a clerical error. But later that night, as she was making her rounds, she noticed a faint light at the end of a long, deserted hallway that she didn't remember seeing before. It was a soft, sickly glow, almost too steady to be ordinary. She followed it. The corridor stretched farther than it should have, lined with peeling paint and doors with small, foggy windows. At the very end was a door marked 314B. Her stomach dropped. The room number was printed in clean, white paint, but the door itself looked old. Worn. As if it had been forgotten for decades. Emma hesitated. She had been trained never to enter unassigned rooms. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pushed her forward. She opened the door. The room was empty. At least at first glance. Hospital beds stood neatly in rows, each with a thin blanket folded at the foot. Monitors beeped softly, though none were attached to any patient. And then she saw the charts lined up on the bedside tables. Names, ages, conditions. All real patients who had been reported missing over the past 6 months. Emma froze. She recognized some names from recent news, patients who had vanished without a trace. According to hospital records, none of them were dead, just gone. And yet, here were their charts, laid out as if they were sleeping, waiting to be checked on. A sudden chill ran down her spine. The door slammed behind her. She spun around, but no one was there. The monitors began to beep faster, the soft hum of machines growing into a low, rhythmic pulse. And then she saw them. Figures, pale and motionless, lying on the beds. They were thin, almost skeletal, faces obscured by shadows. But their eyes were open, blank staring. And yet, Emma could feel them watching her. A whisper came from the far corner of the room, barely audible. "Don't leave." She stumbled back toward the door, fumbling with the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. The beeping grew louder, more insistent. The shadows in the corners shifted, as if the figures were inching closer without moving. Then, as suddenly as it began, the room fell silent. The figures were gone. The door swung open on its own. Emma ran, never looking back. The next morning, she tried to show the room to her supervisor. But the hallway was gone. Every floor plan, every map, every staff member insisted that 314B had never existed. There was no corridor, no door, no room. Only the memory of the soft, sickly glow and the patient charts with the names of the missing. Months later, Emma transferred to another hospital. She told herself she would forget it, that it had been exhaustion or stress. But one night she received a text from an unknown number. "You didn't check on them." The names were listed in the exact order she remembered, each one followed by a small, pale square, like a tiny bed. Emma deleted the message, but the sound of the monitors from that room never left her. Sometimes when she closes her eyes, she can still see the beds. Still hear the soft, insistent beeping. Still feel the weight of eyes staring at her from the shadows. And she knows without doubt that the room is still there. Somewhere. Waiting. The fire started just after midnight. No one knows exactly how it began, but by the time the smoke alarm screamed through the neighborhood, the house was already an orange blaze. Flames clawed through the roof, smoke rolling like dark waves into the street, and the neighbors were out in the cold, staring in horror as the entire home lit up like a funeral pyre. Among those watching was Claire's best friend, Jessica. She had been asleep just a few blocks away when the first glow reflected against her bedroom window. Something about the intensity of the fire made her stomach twist, like it was too close, too deliberate. And then she noticed the phone sitting on the curb, partially melted, vibrating against the hot asphalt. Claire had been inside. Everyone assumed so. Her parents were out of town for the weekend and she was alone. When Jessica picked up the phone, it was still ringing. She answered without thinking. "Hello?" she whispered, trying to hear through the crackle of static and the roar of the fire. There was a pause. Then breathing. Slow. Heavy. Wet. Not the kind of breathing that belongs to someone panicked, but the kind that creeps into your chest, cold and deliberate. Jessica froze. "Claire?" she called again, her voice trembling. No reply, just that breathing, steady, almost waiting. A sudden crack of fire above made her jump. She realized she was standing too close. Smoke burned her eyes, made it hard to focus, but she couldn't hang up. Something told her not to. She could hear the faint background noise now, something shifting, scraping across the walls. A voice finally whispered from the phone. Not Claire's, not human, but soft, chilling. "Help me." Jessica dropped the phone, scrambling backward. It clattered across the asphalt and slid dangerously close to the fire. The flames seemed to pulse in response, as if they knew she was there, as if they were waiting for her next move. The fire department arrived minutes later, and they tried to calm the crowd. Everyone assumed Claire was gone, burned beyond recognition. But the phone, they brought it along, and when one of the firefighters held it, it still vibrated. The screen cracked, but a faint light shimmered across it. They tried to trace the last call. Jessica gave them the number, but it didn't exist anymore. Not in any system. No records. No service provider. Nothing. Weeks later, when the house had been reduced to rubble, Jessica kept replaying what she'd heard. That breathing. That voice. It haunted her. And then one night she noticed something. Every time it rained, faint smoke would curl from the old foundation, lingering even though the fire was long gone. Then she saw it, her reflection in the puddle. Or rather, a second reflection behind her. She spun, heart hammering, but the street was empty. Nothing. She picked up her own phone to call the police, and it started ringing before she even pressed anything. The number flashing on the screen was hers. When she answered, she was certain she would hear Claire, but it wasn't Claire. The same heavy, wet breathing came through, slow and methodical. And then that voice again, soft, taunting, distant, yet right inside her ear. "You shouldn't have left me." Jessica dropped the phone. It hit the ground and cracked. She ran, but in the back of her mind, she could feel the fire still burning, still alive, and that voice, waiting not for her but for whoever would pick up next. Because some calls never end. And the fire? It wasn't over. It never ends. Just waits. It started as something harmless, almost silly. Emma had downloaded a sleep tracking app one restless night, the kind that promised to monitor her sleep cycles and wake her at the perfect moment so she'd feel rested. She thought it was a fun experiment, nothing more than tech meeting curiosity. She was skeptical at first, checking her phone in the mornings and chuckling at graphs showing how little deep sleep she actually got. But after a week, things began to feel off. The first time it happened, Emma woke to the sound of the app speaking in a calm, neutral voice. 3 more minutes, it said. She sat up groggily, blinking at the glowing screen. Her room was dark, the kind of dark that pressed against your eyelids and made shapes seem to crawl along the walls. She shook her head and went back to sleep, dismissing it as a glitch. A few nights later, it was more specific. "Wake up now," the voice said, firm but not loud, like someone speaking from just behind her. The strange thing was she hadn't set an alarm. She glanced at the app. Nothing. She didn't have anyone in her life who would prank her at 3 in the morning, and the voice had wait. It felt alive. Then it began speaking to her while she slept. Emma wasn't sleep-talking herself, not in the usual mumbling nonsense way. The app recorded her sleep, yes, but some nights the playback included another voice, a voice that wasn't hers. Calm, measured, deliberate. It would say things like, "Turn left, now, or you'll regret it." Or, "Don't open the door. Wait." Sometimes it whispered her name softly, almost lovingly, but the tone carried a threat she couldn't shake. She tried ignoring it. She deleted the app, restarted her phone, even unplugged it from the charger at night. But it didn't stop. The voice always found a way to speak to her while she slept. Sometimes it gave warnings. Sometimes it just laughed quietly, a sound that scraped along her bones. One night, Emma woke gasping. The voice had been clearer than ever. 3 more minutes, it said again, but this time there was urgency. She sat up, shaking. Her apartment was empty. The windows were closed. The door was locked. A cold feeling crept over her, that creeping, impossible chill that makes the hair on your arms stand on end. She listened closely, straining to hear anything beyond the normal hum of her apartment. And then she heard it, not from the phone, not from the walls, not even from the ceiling, but from her bedroom doorway. "Emma," it whispered, patient, commanding. "Don't look back. Just do exactly as I say." She froze, paralyzed with fear. Her rational mind screamed it was impossible. Phones can't speak while unplugged. Voices can't manifest from nowhere. And yet, there it was. Calm, sure, waiting. The voice started giving instructions. It told her to stand, step toward the living room, pick up her jacket, grab her keys. Each instruction made her heart pound faster, and yet she felt compelled to obey. She moved like a puppet, guided by something she couldn't see. Then the instructions changed. "Now look behind you," it said softly. She wanted to ignore it, to run, but the words carried a weight that anchored her feet to the floor. Slowly, with a trembling hand, she turned. Nothing. Just the shadowed room, empty and quiet. She laughed nervously, telling herself it was a nightmare, a hallucination. But then she heard the phone buzz from the table. She hadn't touched it. The app was back, open on the screen, recording. And beneath her own quiet breathing, there it was again, the other voice. "You're too late," it whispered. Emma's blood ran cold. In the days that followed, she tried everything. She slept in a friend's apartment. She stayed at a hotel. She even bought a new phone. But wherever she slept, the voice returned. Calm, patient, unyielding. It wasn't just a recording anymore. It was alive. And then came the warning she couldn't ignore. One morning, she woke to find a note slipped under her apartment door. 3 more minutes. You know what to do. That night, she set the phone aside, determined to prove it was all in her head. But as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she felt it. The same weight pressing down, the same voice whispering from nowhere, everywhere, commanding her attention. 3 more minutes, it said. And for the first time, Emma realized it wasn't giving her instructions for sleep. It was giving her instructions for survival. She never missed a warning after that night. She moved when told, stayed when told, always listening, always obeying. But she noticed something terrifying. The voice was no longer just on her app. It followed her. It knew when she left the house. It knew when she returned. It knew when she was alone. One evening, Emma found a recording in the app labeled in her own handwriting, except she had never written it. She pressed play. The voice spoke, clear and cold. "You thought you could ignore me. You thought I would wait. But I always wake you. You belong to me now." Emma never slept alone again. And if you ask her now, she'll tell you the same thing she tells herself every night before closing her eyes. Obey. Or else. Because it's not just an app. It never was. And it never sleeps. Every Sunday, the same man would appear at the family grave. Not just any grave. This one belonged to the Hendersons. The quiet, well-kept plot at the edge of the cemetery, where 3 names were etched in cold stone. Margaret, Samuel, and little Lucy Henderson. No one knew his name. No one had ever seen him speak to anyone. But somehow, everyone noticed him. He would sit there, always alone, always silent. People said he arrived in the early morning, dressed neatly, sometimes with a dark coat even in summer. His hands rested on his knees, his eyes fixed on the tombstones, yet he never seemed to read or pray. It was like he was waiting for something or someone. It was Margaret Henderson's daughter, Anna, who first noticed him. She had started visiting the grave regularly after her mother and brother died in a car accident. She never expected anyone else to care that much. At first, she ignored him, assuming he was some grieving stranger, maybe a relative she didn't know. But week after week he returned. Always. Same time. Same place. At first, Anna tried to avoid him. She would linger longer than usual, hope he left before she got there. But he never did. One morning, finally, she mustered the courage to sit a few feet away. And then she spoke. "Hi," she said nervously. "I don't think we've met." The man didn't flinch. He didn't look at her. He just kept staring. Then, in a low, almost hesitant voice, he said something that made her blood run cold. "I remember when Lucy used to hide her teddy under the maple tree. She'd giggle until she cried. Anna froze. Lucy was her little sister. Nobody knew about the teddy. Nobody knew about the tree. She hadn't told anyone. I don't know who you are, Anna stammered. How do you know that? He finally turned his head, and for the first time she saw his face clearly. Sharp features, pale, almost like a shadow had carved it. And in his eyes, something chilling, like he had been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. I know a lot, he said. Your family. I knew them. Anna's hands shook. Her heart thumped so loudly she thought he might hear it. Knew them? Yes, he whispered, voice barely audible. Samuel used to skip stones at the creek. Margaret sang to Lucy every night. I remember every song. The words made her stomach turn. He was speaking of things only her family had known. Private memories. Things never shared with anyone else. And yet he knew them all. Anna wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. Something in his gaze was watching, studying, waiting. I come here every Sunday, he said, because it's the only time I can see them. The only time I can be close. Who are you? She demanded. The man didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the gravestones, tracing invisible lines with his finger. Then he whispered, almost regretfully, they didn't want me to say goodbye. But I never left. I promised I'd wait. Anna's mind raced. She had never heard of this man. How could he have known so much? So many details? Then it hit her, the cemetery records. Her parents had never mentioned any close family friend who might fit this description. And yet, there was no denying what he had just said. Suddenly, the man leaned forward, resting his forehead against Samuel's stone. He stayed like that for a long moment. Then, softly, he spoke one last line. I should have saved you too. Anna felt the blood drain from her face. The man stood abruptly and walked backward toward the tree line, eyes never leaving her. And then he vanished without a sound. Shaken, Anna ran home and told her mother about the encounter. Her mother's reaction was not relief. It was fear. Anna, you need to promise me something, her mother said. You never go back there alone. Never. Do you understand? Anna nodded, but questions swirled in her mind. How could a stranger know all those details? How could he remember them so vividly? Weeks passed. The man never returned, or so it seemed. Until one evening, Anna's mother found a note slipped under the door. No handwriting. Just one sentence. I'm still here. Waiting. And beneath it, in tiny, precise letters, the words, Lucy's teddy is under the maple tree. No one else had ever known. Anna never went back to that cemetery alone again. But she never forgot the way he had watched her. The way he had known everything, too much. And sometimes, late at night, she could swear she heard the soft sound of footsteps outside her window, waiting for the next Sunday. The residents of the Maplewood apartments never really noticed each other. It wasn't a big building, just 4 floors, 20 units, but the people who lived there kept mostly to themselves. People came and went, nodded in the lobby, waved in the elevator, and that was it. Nobody expected anything unusual. Until the night of the fire. It started with a call from Sarah, one of the tenants. She was frantic when she finally reached someone at the fire department, but the operator didn't understand what she was saying. It's the building, everyone's trapped, she said, voice shaking. But the fire department hadn't received any alarms. No alerts. No smoke detectors going off. Everything looked normal from the outside. Sarah had been walking home from her evening shift at the diner when she noticed something strange. The streetlights in front of the building flickered like a warning, and the front door, normally locked after 9, swung open as if no one had touched it in months. She hesitated, but curiosity and a gnawing fear pulled her inside. The lobby was eerily silent. The faint smell of smoke hit her, but nothing else seemed out of place. Then she heard it, a soft crackling from upstairs, muffled screams mixed with the unmistakable hiss of fire. Panic surged. She ran to the stairwell, pressing her hand against the railing as she climbed. She wasn't the only one heading up. But when she reached the 3rd floor, the hallway was empty. No neighbors. The doors were shut. Some apartments had lights on, faint glows behind the blinds, but no one answered when she knocked. The crackling grew louder, and smoke began to curl beneath a door at the end of the hall. She pushed it open. Inside, flames licked the ceiling and the heat was intense, but there was nobody inside. No one to scream at. No one to drag out. Only the lingering smell of burning fabric and the faint echo of a TV left playing. On the kitchen counter, untouched plates of food sat cold, as if the residents had just stepped out, but that made no sense. The fire had been burning for at least 10 minutes. She called out for help, her voice cracking. "Hello? Is anyone here?" The only answer was the fire's roar and the sudden, sickening realization that the smoke alarms were dead silent. Sarah ran down the stairs, desperate to find someone, anyone. And that's when she noticed it. The apartment doors she had passed earlier weren't just closed. They were blocked from the inside, wedges of furniture jammed under the knobs. Whoever had been inside hadn't wanted anyone to leave. Her hands trembled as she pushed one door open. Inside, she found evidence of a hurried escape, or maybe of being forced out. Scorched furniture, scorch marks climbing the walls, but no bodies. Just charred belongings. A smell of burnt hair hung in the air. And the feeling that someone, or something, had been waiting. She ran to the lobby, pounding the elevator buttons. It wouldn't come. The stairwell doors were locked from the inside, trapping her. She was alone. And then she heard it, the faintest, almost playful laughter echoing from the stairwell above. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Sarah finally managed to pry open the front door and stumbled into the night. Fire trucks arrived moments later, sirens blazing, but the blaze inside had already consumed most of the building. Firefighters searched every floor. Neighbors watched from across the street, some crying, some screaming. But the bodies, they never found the bodies. Every apartment was empty. No trace of Sarah's neighbors. And yet, their belongings were destroyed as if they had been there. The fire department declared it a mysterious structural fire, possibly caused by faulty wiring, and the media moved on quickly. Sarah moved away the next week. She never spoke about what she saw again, not to the police, not to friends, not even to herself. But she kept having dreams. Dreams of the blocked doors. Dreams of the faint laughter echoing through the smoke. And sometimes she swore she could hear it again late at night, right outside her new apartment door. Because the truth, she realized eventually, was simple and horrifying. Whoever, or whatever, wanted them gone that night, it had succeeded. And she had been the last person to see anyone alive in the building. The fire never set off alarms. The neighbors never screamed. And the person responsible, or the thing responsible, had made sure she never looked too closely. And somewhere watching, it was waiting again.